The convoy was already burning when the sniper smiled. 3 vehicles, 42 personnel, 1 extraction route, and he had seeded every inch of it with death 6 weeks before anyone knew the mission existed. His name was Victor Kane. 31 confirmed kills across 4 combat theaters. A ghost who moved through armies like smoke through fingers. He wasn't worried about the rescue team coming for the hostage. He was worried about one thing. The file that crossed his intelligence source's desk 3 days ago. A name. A photograph. A 19-year-old girl with a rifle case almost as tall as she was. He stared at her face for a long time. Then he made a decision that would cost him everything. He underestimated her. The airfield at Forward Operating Base Kestrel sat at the edge of a dry basin that the locals called the Mouth of the Devil, which everyone agreed was an accurate name for a place that averaged 114 degrees Fahrenheit in August and smelled permanently of diesel fuel, hot metal, and something else that nobody talked about directly but everyone recognized. It was the smell of a place where bad things happened regularly. Sergeant First Class Nolan Drake had been stationed at Kestrel for 11 months. He was 38 years old, lean in the way that men become lean when they forget to eat consistently for long enough, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples, and the particular kind of stillness that comes from spending too much time in places where sudden movement gets people killed. He had deployed 6 times. He had brought every member of his team home from 5 of those deployments. The 6th was something he didn't talk about. He was standing at the edge of the tarmac with the rest of his unit, 8 operators, all men, all carrying between them roughly a century of combined combat experience, when the transport helicopter banked low over the ridgeline and dropped toward the landing pad in a wash of rotor blast and red dust. Staff Sergeant Ethan Voss moved up beside him. Voss was the unit's primary designated marksman, 6'1", built like someone had assembled him specifically to intimidate people, with a jaw like a concrete curb and a talent for making everyone around him feel slightly inadequate. He was good at his job and he knew it, which made him useful and occasionally unbearable in roughly equal measure. "Support asset lands in 2 minutes, Voss said, raising his voice over the rotor noise. "Command says designated Overwatch, sniper qualified." "I know what the brief said." "You read the full file?" Nolan had read the full file twice. He had read it the first time and assumed there was an error. He had read it the second time and concluded the error was real but possibly intentional, which was worse. "I read it," he said. "Then you saw the age." "I saw it." Voss said nothing else for a moment. The helicopter was close enough now that they could feel the pressure changes in the air, the rotors chopping through the afternoon heat in a rhythm that vibrated in the chest. 19, Voss said finally. Not a question, just the word, sitting there by itself like something nobody wanted to pick up. "Qualified expert on 4 platforms," Nolan said. "Top of her training cohort." Training cohort. Voss said it the way people say the name of a restaurant they've heard has terrible reviews. "That's outstanding. I'm sure the enemy will give her a participation ribbon." The helicopter touched down. The rotors began cycling down to idle. The side door opened. She stepped out carrying a hard-sided rifle case that was, in fact, nearly as tall as she was, which put it somewhere around 5'4" when resting on its wheels, which was almost exactly her height. She had dark hair pulled back tight, dressed in the same desert pattern as everyone else. Body armor fitted properly, which meant someone had taken the time to adjust it for her frame. She moved without hesitation across the tarmac, pulling the case behind her, and she did not look uncertain. That was the first thing Nolan noticed. The second thing he noticed was that she looked approximately 16 years old, which he understood was his own perception problem, but which he could not entirely override. She stopped in front of him and extended her hand. Her grip was firm and brief and businesslike. "Specialist Avery Cross," she said. "I was told to report to Sergeant Drake." "That's me." He shook her hand. "Welcome to Kestrel." She nodded. Her eyes moved past him, not rudely, but with a kind of automatic professional reflex, scanning the perimeter, the roof lines, the personnel positions, assessing. He recognized the habit because he had trained himself to do the same thing years ago, and it still took effort. In her, it looked like breathing. "What's the current intelligence picture on the valley?" she asked. Behind Nolan, someone made a sound, not quite a laugh. More like the beginning of one that got swallowed. He didn't turn around. "We'll brief at 1800, he said. "Get your gear squared away. Corporal Mendez will show you the billet. Understood. She picked up the case and followed Mendez without looking back. The moment she was out of earshot, Voss stepped up beside Nolan again. She asked about the intelligence picture, Voss said. I heard her. Instead of, asking where the bathroom is. Voss, I'm just noting that this is a significant operation in active hostile territory, and they sent us a kid who looks like she should be worried about finals week. Nolan turned to face his team. They were all watching him. Voss, Keller, Reyes, Wainwright, Santos, Chu, Okafor, and Babcock. 8 faces wearing the particular expression of men who had strong opinions and were calculating whether now was the right time to share them. She's the support asset command assigned, Nolan said. Which means she goes, we protect her position, and she does her job. Questions? Nobody said anything. Outstanding. He checked his watch. Briefing at 1800. Don't be late. The range was Voss's idea. He came to Nolan an hour before the briefing and made the argument with the focused efficiency of someone who had been rehearsing it. Before we put her in an overwatch position on a live operation, Voss said, I want to see her shoot. I want to see how she handles the platform under conditions that are closer to real than a training lane. If she's what the file says she is, fine. If she's not, we're still going, Nolan said. Command doesn't pull support assets because a sergeant doesn't like the look of them. I know that. I just want to know what we're working with. That's not unreasonable. It wasn't unreasonable. That was the problem. Set it up, Nolan said. Keep it professional. What Voss set up was not entirely professional, though it stopped short of being outright hostile. He used the long-range lanes at the eastern end of the base, cleared of other personnel, and he put up targets at distances that most qualified snipers would consider uncomfortable under range conditions. 600 meters, 800, and then, as an afterthought that was clearly not an afterthought, 1,200 meters in the shimmer of the afternoon heat. The team gathered without anyone officially announcing that they would gather. Word traveled the way it always did on small bases, through the specific frequency of shared curiosity. Avery looked at the range setup without expression. Wind? She asked. 14 from the northwest, Voss said. Variable. Gusts to 22. She nodded, opened the rifle case, and began her assembly with the particular economy of motion that separates someone who has done a thing 10,000 times from someone who has done it 300 times. No unnecessary movements, no checking and rechecking from uncertainty. The rifle came together the way a sentence comes together when someone knows exactly what they want to say. It was a bolt-action precision platform, .338 Lapua, suppressed, with a high magnification variable optic that she adjusted without looking down at the turrets by touch and memory. She settled prone, adjusted her position twice, and went still in a way that reminded Nolan of the desert itself between wind gusts, a quality of patience that didn't feel like waiting so much as simply being present in time. The first shot broke at 600 meters. The spotting scope read it center mass, 1 inch left of the geometric center of the target. Nobody said anything. The second shot at 800 meters was inside half an inch of the first. Still, nobody said anything, but Nolan could feel the quality of the silence change. She paused at the 1,200-meter target for a long moment. Long enough that Keller, standing 2 positions to Nolan's left, started to say something. Then she fired. The round traveled approximately 1.4 seconds through air that was actively trying to move it sideways. When it arrived, it was inside the kill zone by a margin that Voss verified 3 times before he lowered the spotting scope. Wind compensation was clean, Voss said, and his voice had lost the particular edge it had been carrying since the helicopter landed. Avery stood up and began field stripping the rifle. I saw the mirage patterns on the ground between the 2 ridges, she said. There's a secondary crosswind below the main stream at about 400 meters out. It was pushing the bullet back toward center. Voss looked at her for a moment. You read the mirage pattern. It's not complicated if you give it enough time. Most shooters don't notice that layer. I know. She said it without superiority, just as a fact. Nolan watched Voss process this, the slight recalibration happening somewhere behind his eyes that only someone who knew him well would recognize. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was the first small movement in that direction. That night, after the briefing, which Avery attended in silence, taking no notes that anyone could see, missing nothing that anyone said. Nolan found himself standing outside the operations center with the mission overlay in his head and a problem he couldn't entirely name. It wasn't her ability. He had seen enough today to know the ability was real. It was something else. Something about the valley itself. About the intelligence picture that felt, in some way he couldn't precisely articulate, like a picture someone had painted rather than a picture someone had taken. The convoy 6 days ago. 3 vehicles destroyed, 8 personnel wounded, no fatalities, which was unusual for an engagement of that intensity. As if the attack had been designed to wound rather than to kill. As if it had been designed to generate a response. He looked at the mission parameters again. Extraction of a single intelligence asset from a compromised safe house. 12 kilometers into the Red Mesa Valley. 1 primary extraction route, 2 alternates, all of which converged at the same ridgeline before splitting again. He had run extractions harder than this. He couldn't figure out why this one felt wrong. They lifted off at 0130. The helicopter cabin was lit in the near-infrared glow of NOD-compatible green, the kind of light that made everyone look like they were underwater and had the quality of making the small space feel even smaller. 8 operators, 1 support specialist, and enough equipment to sustain a 2-day operation if things went longer than planned. Avery sat near the rear with the rifle case between her knees and her hands folded on top of it. Her eyes were open. She was looking at something between her and the opposite bulkhead that had nothing to do with the helicopter interior. Reyes noticed and leaned over. He was the youngest of the regular team at 24, compact, with the particular nervous energy of someone who managed anxiety by converting it into motion. He hadn't said anything to Avery since her arrival, not hostile but not welcoming either, observing from a safe distance. "You good?" he said, raising his voice over the engine. She looked at him as if surfacing from somewhere. "Fine." "First time in country?" "Yes." He nodded, expecting that to end the conversation. Then she said, "You've been rotating your left wrist since we boarded. Old fracture?" He looked down at his hand. He hadn't realized he was doing it. 5 years ago, he said. "Cold weather makes it tighten up. It's going to be 41 degrees at the objective elevation. Might want to keep it wrapped until we're operational." He stared at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "Thanks." She went back to looking at whatever she'd been looking at. The helicopter banked east and began its terrain-following approach into the valley, dropping low enough that the rotor wash kicked dust off the ridgelines as they passed. In the NVG view through the porthole, the Red Mesa Valley looked exactly like what it was. A geological problem that someone had decided to call a terrain feature. Cliffs of compressed red sandstone, dry washes that became rivers after rain, 1,000 natural depressions and overhangs that could conceal anything from a scorpion to an armored vehicle. It was, Nolan thought for the 4th time, a perfect killing ground. 2 minutes, the crew chief called. He watched his team check equipment, tighten down the things that needed tightening, go through the small mechanical rituals that were partly practical and partly the human equivalent of touching wood. He had watched men do this for long enough that he could read their states with reasonable accuracy. Voss. Controlled. A slight edge to his jaw that meant he was running threat scenarios. Reliable. Reyes. Managing the wrist thing, breath a bit short, would normalize on the ground. Reliable. Avery. Still doing the underwater thing with her eyes. He moved to sit across from her. Cross. She focused on him immediately. "What are you thinking about?" he said. "The wind data from the pre-mission brief," she said. "It doesn't match the thermal pattern for this time of year and this elevation. The valley creates a compression effect after midnight. The actual wind at my overwatch position is going to be different from what we calculated." "How different?" "I won't know until I'm there, but I wanted you to know I might need more time to confirm 0 before I can guarantee first-round impacts." He looked at her for a moment. "How long?" 10 minutes if conditions are cooperative, 20 if they're not. We have a 15-minute window before we're exposed at the insertion point." "I know." She said it without apology, just with the weight of it, which was its own kind of pressure. 1 minute, the crew chief called. Nolan moved back to his position and pulled his kit tight. The helicopter flared and touched down in a draw between 2 ridges, gentle as a bird landing, the crew chief already gesturing them out before the skids fully settled. The team poured out in practice sequence, spreading into a perimeter, and Avery came last with the rifle case, moving to the rally point without being directed. They were 300 meters from the insertion when she stopped. Not dramatically, not with a warning shout. She just stopped, and Nolan, who was 2 positions ahead, almost missed it. He turned back and found her standing at the edge of a dry wash, looking northwest along the ridgeline. Cross. He moved back to her, keeping his voice low. Problem? Wind shifted, she said. The thermal compression happened earlier than I expected. It's coming from the northwest now instead of the west. She paused. There's another smell on it, under the dust. He stopped. What kind of smell? Diesel. Old diesel, like equipment that ran earlier in the day and isn't running now. Nolan keyed his radio. All elements, hold position. Then to her. You sure about that? No, she said immediately. I'm not sure. I might be wrong. But I wanted you to know. Behind him, Voss had moved up. What's the issue? She's picking up diesel on the wind. Voss looked at the ridgeline, then at Avery. We're 2 clicks from the only road in this valley, and there's a village that runs generators. I know, Avery said. I know that's the easy explanation. You've never been in combat. You don't know what normal smells like out here. She didn't argue with him. She just looked at the ridgeline. How long to confirm? Nolan asked. Nolan, I can't confirm or deny. It's just a smell. Just a wind that moved earlier than I thought it would. It might be nothing. She paused. But if someone positioned equipment on that north ridge this afternoon and pulled out the vehicles after, the smell would be exactly what I'm detecting. And if that's what happened, then someone knew our insertion route in advance. The valley was completely silent around them. 14 seconds, maybe. Then the first shot cracked out of the northern ridgeline and punched through the dry air 6 inches above Nolan's head. Contact north! Get down! Gipo. The team fractured into trained response. 600 hours of collective repetition converting to automatic action in the half-second between the first shot and the second. Nolan was behind a rock before he had consciously decided to move. Reyes and Keller anchoring left, Voss and Santos right, and the radio already filling with Wainwright calling the contact bearing while Chu and Okafor pushed to cover a southern approach. They all suddenly and simultaneously understood might not be safe. 3 separate firing positions. Maybe 4. The muzzle flashes were disciplined. 2 shots and move, 2 shots and move. Which meant trained personnel, not irregulars. Which meant this was what Avery had been trying to tell them. Cross, where are you? Behind the wash, she said over the radio. Her voice was flat. Not calm exactly. Controlled. I have eyes on the north ridge. Request permission to establish overwatch. Voss was already suppressing northeast with controlled semi-automatic fire, but he took a half-second to look back at the wash. She's going to get herself killed trying to climb up there. Cross, what's your route? Nolan said. The draw on my right goes to a secondary ridgeline, 50 meters above the firing position. I can see a natural recess that provides profile from the north, but is invisible from the valley floor. Estimated 3 minutes to reach it. 3 minutes in an active ambush was an eternity. Santos, push south and give her cover on the draw, Nolan said. Cross, you have 2 minutes. After that, I pull Santos back. A pause. Understood, she said. He went back to the fight, and for the next 2 minutes, the world contracted to the small universe of muzzle flash and rock and the sharp, immediate calculus of where the rounds were coming from and where to move so they stopped coming there. He had done this enough times that the fear was a background process, present but not controlling, like a smoke alarm in another room. At 1 minute 45 seconds, Santos reported the draw was clear. At 2 minutes 12 seconds, a single shot came from 50 meters above and to the northwest of their previous position. The incoming fire from one of the 4 firing positions stopped. Completely. The other 3 positions adjusted, which told him immediately that whoever was running this understood the tactical implication of that silence. They knew the equation had changed. That's 1, Avery said over the radio. 3 remaining. Northwest firing position is suppressed. Be aware. The position you're using for cover on the east end has a vulnerability from the primary ridge. They're going to start working their way around your right flank in approximately 4 minutes. Nolan processed this. Voss, you hearing that? Hearing it, Voss said, and there was something different in his voice, something that hadn't been there before. Wainwright, Babcock, Hosat, collapse the right flank. Use the secondary rock formation. Move now. They moved. The flanking fire came 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, landing exactly where they had been, not where they were. Chu Okafor push north along the wash, Nolan said. We're going to start collapsing the middle. The firefight lasted another 22 minutes, which is a very long time when someone is actively trying to kill you, and a very short time when you look back at it afterward and realize how many things almost went differently. 2 more shots from Avery's position. 2 more firing positions that went abruptly silent. The 4th position attempted to relocate, moving northeast across the ridge, in a pattern that would have worked against anyone who wasn't watching from exactly where Avery was watching from. The 4th shot. A longer pause before this one. Almost 8 seconds. Then silence. Complete, absolute ringing silence. The kind that lands after sustained fire and has a quality that is almost physical, like pressure releasing. Nolan stayed down for another 90 seconds. Discipline. Then he raised his head above the rock line. Nothing moved on the north ridge. All elements, report status. Keller had a graze on his forearm that was bleeding through his sleeve. Santos had taken a rock fragment to the jaw that had opened a cut requiring pressure but not immediate evacuation. Everyone else was whole. 2 minutes passed. Contact broken, Wainwright reported from the east position. No movement, no sound. Cross, Nolan said. What do you have? A pause. The ridge is clear, she said. They're gone. All of them. Another pause. There was a 5th position to the south that never fired. I think it was forward observation. They pulled it when they realized the ambush was failing. Nolan sat against the rock for a moment. A forward observation position, which meant this wasn't an opportunistic ambush. This was a layered interdiction with integrated fires and dedicated observation. This was a planned operation by someone who knew how to set one up. And the only reason it hadn't worked was a 19-year-old specialist with a bolt-action rifle and a sensitivity to wind that he was going to spend a long time thinking about. Voss appeared at his shoulder. His face in the green-tinged darkness was unreadable. She called the diesel smell, Voss said. She did. I told her she didn't know what normal smelled like out here. I know. A pause. The flanking move, Voss said. The timing she gave us. I know. Voss was quiet for a moment. I've been running combat operations for 14 years, he said. I've had a lot of Overwatch support. I know. She read that firefight in real time from a position she'd never seen before and told us where rounds were going to land before they landed there. Nolan didn't say anything. That's not something you teach, Voss said. He walked away back to his position, and Nolan stayed where he was for another moment, looking up at the ridgeline where Avery was already beginning the process of collapsing her position, moving without being told, because the forward observer pulling back south told her what it told him. This wasn't the main event. This was the greeting. Whoever had set this up had just gotten a look at how his team responded to contact, which meant right now, somewhere in the Red Mesa Valley, an assessment was being made. He keyed his radio. Cross, come down. We need to move. Already moving, she said. 30 seconds later, she materialized out of the dark at the rally point, rifle on her back, case gone. She'd cached it somewhere along the draw, which meant she'd planned for that possibility before she went up, which meant she was thinking 2 moves ahead. Nolan looked at her for a moment in the green light. She looked back at him. 4 contacts, she said. 240 meters to 1,100 meters. I missed nothing I should have hit. A pause. I wanted you to know that the shot at 800 meters was in marginal conditions. The wind was doing something I didn't fully understand until afterward. I got lucky with my hold. He stared at her. She had just made 4 shots in active combat conditions, in darkness, from a position she'd never used, had saved his entire team from a flanking maneuver. And she was telling him the one shot where she'd guessed on the wind hold and gotten away with it. Most people don't volunteer their marginal shots, he said. I know, she said, but you need accurate information about what I can actually do, not what I want you to think I can do. He nodded slowly. Move out, he said. The team pushed southeast, using the dead ground along the valley floor, putting distance between themselves and the ambush site, heading toward the extraction point by the alternate route that was now their only route, because someone out there had known the primary one. Nobody spoke. The desert moved around them, silent and indifferent, and full of the particular kind of waiting that places have when they are waiting for something else to happen. At the back of the patrol, last in file as her position dictated, Avery Cross moved through the dark with her rifle on her back and her eyes on the ridgeline to the north, where something had moved 20 minutes ago and hadn't moved since. She filed it away. Pattern recognition. In a few hours, she was going to need everything she had filed away. Because the man who had set up that ambush was not finished, and he was very, very good. The alternate route added 40 minutes to a timeline that was already compressed, and every one of those minutes had a particular quality, not exactly fear, but something adjacent to it, the feeling of moving through a space that someone else had already thought about more carefully than you had. Nolan pushed the pace, not recklessly, but with the specific urgency of a man who had recalculated the situation and didn't like the new numbers. The ambush had told him three things. First, their insertion route had been compromised, which meant the intelligence chain had a hole somewhere between the planning cell and the valley floor. Second, whoever ran the ambush was disciplined and patient, which was a more dangerous combination than aggressive and reckless. Third, the ambush had failed to inflict casualties beyond the 2 minor wounds, and whoever ran it now knew that, which meant they were being assessed right now, in real time, by someone who was adjusting. He kept that thought to himself. His team didn't need the full weight of it while they were still moving in the dark. The safe house was a low stone structure set against a crumbling terrace wall on the eastern edge of a dry, agricultural flat, the kind of building that had been repurposed so many times over so many decades that it had forgotten its original function. 2 rooms. A root cellar that served as a holding space. The asset, a signals intelligence source who had been operating in this network for 14 months before his cover began unraveling, had been inside for 6 days, which was 3 days longer than the plan had allowed for, and approximately 5 days longer than was psychologically comfortable for anyone involved. They reached the outer perimeter of the safe house at 0347. Avery settled into an overwatch position on a low ridge to the northwest without being assigned to it. Nolan noticed and didn't correct it. She had picked the right ground, not the highest ground, which would have silhouetted her, but the ground with the best sightlines across the 3 most likely approach vectors, which was a different and better calculation. "Set," she said over the radio. "Hold there," Nolan said. "We're making entry." The entry was clean. The asset, a thin, exhausted-looking man in his mid-40s, named in the file only as Cardinal, was in the root cellar with a burner phone and approximately 48 hours of water remaining, and the specific affect of someone who had convinced himself he was already dead, and was now experiencing the complicated emotion of discovering he was not. "You're late," he said, when Nolan came down the cellar stairs. "Enjoy it anyway," Nolan said. Getting Cardinal ready to move took 11 minutes, which was longer than the plan called for. He had a knee that had worsened in the cramped cellar, and the physical package they needed to bring out with him. A single encrypted drive and a backup set of handwritten notes, both stored in a waterproof sleeve that Cardinal had kept against his body for the entire 6 days, had to be properly secured in a way that would survive whatever the next several hours decided to look like. At 0409, Nolan called the exfil. "All elements, we have the package. Moving to primary pickup in 40 minutes. Cross, you have our back." "Affirm," she said. "Be advised. Vehicle movement approximately 2 kilometers north-northeast. Single vehicle, slow, no lights. It stopped 11 minutes ago and hasn't moved." Nolan absorbed this. Single vehicle. Yes. Could be farmers, could be nothing. But it stopped at the only position in this valley that has a clear view of the southern approach to your current location. Keller, who was nearest to Nolan, heard this through his own earpiece and looked at Nolan with an expression that communicated several things at once without requiring words. "We go," Nolan said. "Alternate route south through the terrace fields. Adds time, but keeps us in the low ground." He keyed the radio. "Cross, maintain overwatch on that vehicle. Anything moves, I need it immediately." "Understood." They moved. Cardinal was slower than ideal. His knee was a real problem, not an exaggeration, and by the time they had covered 300 meters through the terraced fields, uneven ground, irrigation furrows that turned ankles in the dark, the constant low-level calculation of footing multiplied across 9 people, including one who was not a trained operator, Nolan could feel the timeline fraying at the edges. At the 400-meter mark, Avery's voice came over the radio. "Vehicle is moving again, northeast. It's not leaving, it's repositioning." A pause of 3 seconds. "There's a second vehicle. It was stationary the whole time I was watching the first one. I missed it initially because it was cold. Engine off for longer than the first." "How long has it been stationary?" "Based on the thermal differential I'm reading now, at least 2 hours." 2 hours. That vehicle was in position before they landed. "Cross, what's your assessment?" A pause. Longer than her usual pauses, which were already shorter than most people's. "I think there's a blocking position being established on the northern approach to your pickup zone. The first vehicle was a spotter. The second vehicle is the element." Another pause. "I think someone knows your pickup location." The pickup location had been established in a planning cell with 5-person access. Nolan had been in that cell. So had his operations officer, 2 intel analysts, and a liaison from a partner organization whose name he had never been given. He kept moving. There was nothing else to do right now except move and think and keep Cardinal on his feet. "Alternate pickup," he said. "I'm calling in a change." He switched frequencies and raised the air mission commander. The conversation was short, terse, and produced the answer he needed. "Alternate pickup. Viable. Landing zone Foxtrot. Approved. 45 minutes." Landing zone Foxtrot was 2 kilometers further south and required crossing an open flat that provided exactly 0 cover for approximately 300 meters. He told his team. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Santos said, "Great," and they kept moving. At 0441, they reached the edge of the open flat, and Nolan called a halt in the last available cover. A tumbled section of old stone wall that was doing its best impersonation of meaningful concealment. He looked at the flat. 300 meters of nothing, in full dark, with NODs, at their current pace, approximately 4 minutes of exposure. If there was anyone watching that flat with any kind of optic, 4 minutes was more than enough time. "Cross," he said. "What do you have on the flat?" A pause, long enough that Reyes, crouched next to Nolan behind the wall, looked over. "One position," she said. "North side of the far tree line. Single shooter, I think. Prone. He's been still long enough that I almost didn't catch him. Body temperature signature is low, which means he's been there a while and knows how to manage his heat profile." Nolan absorbed this. One shooter on the far tree line, covering the flat. The 2 vehicles to the north, establishing a blocking position. The ambush at the insertion point that had failed. Pieces of a picture that were trying to tell him something. "Can you take the shot?" he said. A silence. It was not a short silence. "Distance is approximately 900 meters, Avery said. "Wind at my position is manageable, but I have a ridge between me and the target that's creating a turbulence pattern I can't fully read from here. I would estimate 60 to 70% confidence on a first-round hit at that range in these conditions." 60 to 70%, Voss repeated, not over the radio, just to Nolan, under his breath. Nolan understood the problem immediately. If she shot and missed, the position was burned. The target would relocate, and they would be crossing that flat without knowing where the threat had moved. A miss was potentially worse than not shooting at all. "What happens if we go around?" Nolan said. "The only around route adds approximately 35 minutes and brings you within 400 meters of the northern blocking position. If they have any kind of observation on the southern end of their formation, they'll hear you. 4 minutes of exposure on the flat, or 35 minutes within earshot of a blocking element." Nolan looked at the flat again. 300 meters. In the dark. With a shooter who had been prone long enough to go cold, which meant patience, which meant discipline. "Cross, I need an honest answer," he said. "Not what you think I want to hear. Can you take that shot?" The pause this time was different from her other pauses. The other ones had the quality of processing. This one had the quality of honesty costing something. "I can attempt it," she said. "I cannot guarantee it. The turbulence pattern, I've been watching the mirage and the way dust is moving off that ridge, and I think I understand it well enough to make a reasonable adjustment, but I haven't fired in these conditions tonight. I had a different position for the earlier shots. I don't know how much that matters." "Best guess?" 72%, she said. "If I wait another 3 minutes to watch the wind cycle." Nolan turned to Voss. Voss looked at the flat, at the far tree line. He had done this calculation himself 100 times from the other side of it, which was maybe why he didn't say anything for a moment. 3 minutes, Voss said. Then she shoots, and we move regardless. Nolan keyed the radio. Cross, you have 3 minutes. Take the shot on your timeline. Copy. The 3 minutes were some of the longest Nolan had experienced in 11 months at Kestrel, and he had experienced some long minutes. Cardinal sat against the wall with his knees stretched out and his hands around the waterproof sleeve against his chest, not looking at anything in particular. Reyes was doing the wrist rotation again. Santos had pressed his field dressing against the jaw wound and was holding pressure with the expression of a man who was annoyed at himself for having a jaw wound. Wainwright leaned over to Nolan. You trust her. It wasn't quite a question. She called the diesel, Nolan said quietly. She called the flank timing. She called the vehicle repositioning. Range shooting is one thing. 900 meters in these conditions. I know. If she misses, I know, Wainwright. A pause. Just saying. I know what you're saying. Nolan looked at the flat. I've made calls with worse odds. At 2 minutes and 51 seconds, the shot broke. In the night, suppressed, at that distance, it was barely audible. A compressed crack that could have been a rock splitting in the cold. The figure in the north tree line stopped being a figure. Target down, Avery said. Confirm no movement. Move now. There may be a secondary I haven't identified. They moved, crossing 300 meters of open flat while carrying a partially mobility-impaired intelligence asset with the knowledge that a secondary threat might exist somewhere in the dark ahead of them was an experience that Nolan later declined to describe to anyone in any kind of detail. The team moved in disciplined bounds, sectors covered, cardinal in the protected center of the formation, and every second of it had the specific quality of time that is simultaneously moving too fast and not fast enough. They made the far tree line in 4 minutes and 11 seconds. No secondary. Nolan exhaled. Just once. Then he was back to it. Cross, collapse your position and move to the pickup zone. You know the route? I have it. 15 minutes. She arrived in 12. She was breathing harder than when she'd arrived at Kestrel, which was the first physical evidence Nolan had seen that the night was costing her something. There was a thin cut along her right forearm, not deep, from what looked like a rock edge. She'd moved fast through the ridge terrain and hadn't been careful about it. She didn't mention it. She took a position on the western edge of the landing zone and began scanning. Reyes moved up beside her. He pulled a pressure bandage from his kit and held it out. She looked at it, then at him. It's not bad, she said. Arm out, he said. She held her arm out and he wrapped it without ceremony, and she kept scanning while he did it, which required a specific combination of stillness and trust that he filed away without comment. Nice shot, he said. The 900. I got lucky with the wind cycle, she said. You keep saying that because it keeps being true. He tied off the bandage. At what point does getting lucky with the wind cycle every single time stop being luck? She considered this with the seriousness she applied to everything. I'll let you know when I figure that out. The helicopter came in at 0531, low and fast from the south, flared hard over the designated zone, and was on the ground for 47 seconds. Long enough to load 9 operators, 1 specialist, and 1 intelligence asset with a bad knee who needed help with the last step up. The wheels lifted as first light was beginning to define the eastern ridgeline in shades of gray and rust. Nolan sat against the bulkhead and did what he always did in the first minutes after a mission that had not gone the way it was planned. He ran through the sequence from the beginning, looking for the moments that mattered. The diesel, the flank call, the vehicle repositioning, the 900-meter shot she'd given herself 3 minutes to confirm on a wind pattern she'd never fired through before, and the things she'd said afterward, again. I got lucky. He'd known operators who undersold themselves strategically, as a form of positioning. He'd known operators who undersold themselves defensively so that expectations stayed manageable. He'd known operators who undersold themselves because they genuinely couldn't calibrate their own performance, which was its own kind of problem. He didn't think Avery was any of those things. He thought she was being accurate, which meant what she considered a marginal luck situation and what everyone else considered an exceptional performance were operating on different scales, and the gap between those scales was very large. He wasn't sure whether that should reassure him or make him more concerned. Across the cabin, Voss was watching the valley recede through the porthole. His face was doing the thing it did when he was working through something he didn't have a clean resolution for. Nolan caught his eye. Voss held the look for a moment, then looked away. That was enough. The debrief at Kestrel lasted 3 hours and covered the ambush, the route compromise, the blocking element, and the exfil in sufficient detail that by the end of it, the operations officer, a lean major named Ferris, who had the specific humorlessness of someone who had been told very bad news many times and had stopped being surprised by it, had filled most of a whiteboard and was staring at it with his arms crossed. The insertion route, Ferris said, 5-person planning cell. All cleared, all vetted. That's what I was told, Nolan said. One of those 5 people, or someone with access to someone with access. Nolan leaned forward. That ambush was set up at least 24 hours in advance. The forward observer vehicle had been stationary for 2 hours before we arrived. This wasn't last minute. Someone planned it. Ferris looked at his whiteboard for a moment. Then he looked at Avery, who was sitting at the far end of the table. She had changed out of her kit, and the pressure bandage on her arm was visible against her sleeve. Specialist Cross, he said, your assessment of the threat. Is this a local network, or do you think this is coordinated at a higher level? The room shifted. Not dramatically, but Nolan felt it. The particular quality of attention that occurs when a room realizes a question it thought was procedural is actually important. Avery looked at the whiteboard. The ambush was tactically sophisticated, she said. Integrated fires with dedicated observation, discipline on movement and timing, patience to position assets more than 24 hours in advance. Local networks don't usually have that combination. They have 1 or 2 of those things. Not all 3. She paused. The blocking element being pre-positioned at the alternate pickup zone is the part that concerns me most. The alternate was not in any document below the senior planning level. Whoever told them that had a specific kind of access. Ferris looked at her for a long moment. You read the planning documentation, he said. It was in the mission brief packet. The alternate landing zone designation was in the restricted annex. A pause. Yes, she said. I read the restricted annex. Another pause. This one had a different texture. Specialist, Ferris said carefully. The restricted annex has a specific distribution list. I know. I was on it. She said it simply. Headquarters added me when they assigned me to the operation. I assumed you knew. Ferris looked at Nolan. Nolan looked back at him. Neither of them had known that, which meant Avery Cross had gone into this operation with access to information that Nolan hadn't realized she had, and she had used it not to tell him things he already knew, but to look at the same intelligence picture from a different angle and notice the thing in it that didn't fit. The alternate pickup location, Nolan said. You knew the alternate when you flagged the vehicle repositioning. Yes, she said. That's why I flagged it specifically. The first vehicle could have been anything, but the repositioning put it at the only ground position with line of sight to the alternate zone approach. That was too specific to be coincidental. Nolan sat back. Ferris uncapped his marker and wrote something on the whiteboard. Then he stepped back and looked at it. We have a problem, he said, and I don't think it ends with this operation. He was right. Nolan knew he was right. The operation they had just run was one thread, and the person who had set it up was not the kind of person who used all their resources on one thread. After the debrief, he found Avery outside the operations building in the early morning heat, sitting on a low concrete barrier with her eyes on the eastern perimeter. She had a bottle of water she wasn't drinking. You should sleep, he said. I know. He sat beside her. The heat was already building, even at 800, the kind of early morning heat that told you what the afternoon was going to be and gave you time to resent it in advance. The restricted annex, he said. I'm sorry if I should have mentioned it earlier. I wasn't sure it was relevant until the vehicles. It's not a problem. He paused. Who put you on the distribution list? She looked at the perimeter. My program officer, she said. From training. He waited. I was part of a specific evaluation program, she said. For the last 18 months. It's classified above my ability to discuss it in this setting. She paused. The program puts people on operational distribution lists so that the trainees can study real intelligence pictures. Most of the time, it's academic. This time, it happened to be the mission I was assigned to. He looked at her profile. And your training program, he said. The classified one. Yes. That's why the file looked the way it did. No combat history listed. She turned to look at him directly for the first time in this conversation. The history that's listed is accurate for public record. The program has separate documentation. He held her gaze for a moment. There was something in her eyes that he had seen in other people. People who had been trained to do something specific and difficult and had been doing it long enough that it had become part of the structural material of who they were. Not a performance. Not a capability they picked up and put down. Something permanent. He didn't push it. He had been in long enough to know when a wall was there and when asking about what was behind it would produce an answer, and when it wouldn't. The man who set up that ambush, he said. The level of coordination. Do you know who that is? She was quiet for 3 seconds. There's a name in the threat analysis from the restricted annex, she said carefully. Victor Kane, former contractor, multiple theater experience, disappeared from tracking approximately 18 months ago. She paused. The ambush pattern matches his historical signature. Integrated observation, pre-positioned blocking, patience on timing. Nolan had heard the name. Not often. In the particular way that certain names circulate without complete information attached, a weight without a full shape. You think Kane set that up? He said. I think it's likely, she said. And if it's Kane, then this operation isn't finished. He doesn't run one operation against one target. He runs campaigns. She paused. He'll be looking at what happened tonight and he'll be adjusting. He lost the ambush element, the blocking element, and the safe house location. He won't lose those resources without responding. Nolan looked at the eastern perimeter. The sun was fully up now, burning everything to a flat, shadowless brightness that made the desert look like it had been scoured. What do you need? He said. She looked at him. The question seemed to take her slightly off guard. Not dramatically, but enough that he noticed the brief recalibration. Time, she said. I need to look at the full intelligence picture for this valley. Everything. Not just the mission brief. Historical movement patterns, satellite imagery, intercept data, if there is any. She paused. If Kane is running a campaign in this valley, there will be a pattern in the data. There always is. I'll talk to Ferris. She nodded and looked back at the perimeter. He stood up to go. Sergeant Drake, she said. He turned. The shot at 900 meters, she said. I want you to know I wasn't certain. I told you 60 to 70 initially because that was honest. The 72 was me convincing myself I could see the wind pattern well enough. She looked at the water bottle in her hands. I was right, but I wasn't certain. I need you to know the difference. He looked at her for a moment. Why does that matter? He said. You made the shot. Because next time I might give you a number and be wrong, she said. And if you're making decisions based on my numbers, you need to know they have a margin. He thought about this. Every number I work with has a margin, he said. That's not new information. I know, but mine might have a different kind of margin than you're used to. He stood there for another moment. Get some sleep, Cross, he said. Be at the intelligence cell at 1400. I'll have Ferris set up access. He walked back toward the operations building. Behind him, she finally drank some of the water. The intelligence cell at FOB Kestrel was a room that had been intended as a storage space and had been converted through a gradual process of priority adjustment until it contained 3 workstations, a large display, a printer that worked 2 days out of 3, and more classified imagery than was comfortable to have in a room with a door that sometimes didn't latch properly. Nolan arranged access and told Ferris what Avery had said about Kane. Ferris listened without interrupting, which was his tell for when something was genuinely concerning him. If Cross is right about Kane, Ferris said, then we are significantly under-resourced for what's coming. I know. I'll need to push this up, get additional support. Kane will know the moment we increase the signature here, Nolan said. More assets, more movement, more radio traffic. He has people watching. Then we have a sequencing problem. Yes. They stood with that for a moment. What's her background? Ferris said. The real one. I don't know yet, Nolan said. She mentioned an evaluation program, classified. I didn't push. Ferris looked at the whiteboard where the night's events were still mapped out. The ambush location, the vehicle positions, the alternate pickup zone, the arcs connecting them into a picture that was beginning to look less like a single operation and more like the opening move of something longer. She's 19, Ferris said. I know. People don't just get classified evaluation program histories at 19. No, Nolan said. They don't. Ferris looked at the whiteboard for another moment. I want her full file, he said. Whatever's available at my clearance level. She said it's above that. A pause. Then I want to know who's above that I need to call, Ferris said. Because if we're running operations against Victor Kane with this team and this asset package, I want to know exactly what we have and what we don't. That night, while most of the base slept, the intelligence cell light was on. Avery Cross sat at the center workstation with 6 months of Red Mesa Valley data spread across 3 screens. Movement reports, imagery analysis, intercept summaries, the accumulated bureaucratic record of a campaign that hadn't been recognized as a campaign yet because nobody had looked at all of it in the same room at the same time. She was looking at it now. The patterns were there. They were subtle, and they were distributed across multiple data streams in a way that required seeing all of them simultaneously to recognize the shape. But they were there. And the shape they made was not the shape of an opportunistic network exploiting local conditions. It was the shape of someone who had spent months building a killing ground, placing pieces with the patience of a man who thought in campaigns and not in operations, who understood that the best trap is one where the target doesn't realize it's a trap until the moment before the mechanism closes. She sat back. In the valley tomorrow, the same stars would be overhead, the same red cliffs, the same dry washes and compressed sandstone ridges. And somewhere out there, Victor Kane was looking at his own intelligence picture, making his own adjustments, thinking about the thing that had gone wrong tonight and how to correct for it. She pulled up the imagery of the valley's northern ridgeline. Her finger traced a route, a position, a distance. She wrote a number on the notepad beside the workstation, circled it. The printer, for once, worked on the first try. The number she had circled was 1,847 meters. She looked at it for a long time before she folded the paper and put it in her breast pocket. Then she turned off the workstation, gathered the printed imagery, and went to find somewhere to sleep that wasn't the intelligence cell floor, which was where she had almost fallen asleep twice in the last hour. She managed 4 hours on a cot in the female billeting tent, a space that had been set up with the optimistic assumption that more women would be rotating through Kestrel and which currently housed only her, giving it the specific desolation of a room waiting for a party that hadn't arrived. She was back in the intelligence cell at 0630. Ferris found her there at 0715 when he came in for the morning update, and the expression on his face when he saw the printed imagery spread across the table in a sequence she had constructed during the night suggested that he had not expected this particular development before his first coffee. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "You've been here since yesterday afternoon," he said. "I slept," she said. 4 hours. "That's not what I—" He stopped, looked at the imagery. The route she had marked in red, the position she had circled, the timeline she had written along the bottom edge of the central photograph with a fine point marker. He moved closer. "What am I looking at?" "Kane's pattern," she said. 6 months of it. He leaned over the table. She walked him through it. Each piece, each connection, the way the movement data and the imagery and the intercept summaries fit together when you arrange them in the right sequence. It took 20 minutes. Ferris didn't interrupt. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "This took you one night," he said. "The data was already there. I just arranged it." He looked at the timeline along the bottom of the photograph. "This position here," he said, pointing to a circled location on the northern ridgeline. "You think he's staging from here? I think this is where he goes when he needs to observe without being observed. There are 3 previous imagery captures with a vehicle in this location, all at times that correspond to operations in this valley that didn't go the way they were supposed to." She paused. "Including the convoy attack 6 days ago." Ferris straightened up. "The convoy attack was assessed as opportunistic," he said. "I know what it was assessed as." She said it without challenge, just as a statement of fact. "I think the assessment is wrong. The convoy was carrying signals equipment. The attack destroyed the equipment but killed nobody. That's not opportunistic. That's precision denial. Take the capability, leave the personnel, avoid the response that fatalities would generate." He looked at her. "You think he's been managing escalation deliberately?" Ferris said. "I think he's been building towards something that requires the valley to stay at a specific temperature, enough activity to justify his resources. Not enough to bring in the kind of response that would disrupt his timeline. She pointed to the circled position on the ridge. And I think when he came back last night and found that the ambush failed and the asset was gone, he went to that position to reassess. You think he's up there now? I think he was up there this morning, she said. The imagery is 18 hours old. I don't know where he is right now. Ferris looked at the position. It was on the northern ridgeline, approximately 6 kilometers from the base perimeter. Elevated, good sight lines in 3 directions. The kind of position a man who thought in campaigns would choose because it let him see the whole board. If we could confirm he's there, Ferris said carefully, and if we had the range, 1847 meters, she said. He turned to look at her. I calculated it last night, she said. From the best available overwatch position that would also keep me off his line of sight until I was set. She paused. It's beyond standard engagement parameters. It's beyond most engagement parameters, Ferris said. Yes. The record confirmed engagement for this platform under combat conditions is approximately 2,200 meters, she said, under specific atmospheric conditions with a spotter and a stable firing platform. I know. She looked at the imagery. I'm not saying I can make that shot. I'm saying if we could confirm he's in that position, it would be worth considering. Ferris stood with this for a moment. I need to talk to Drake, he said. The conversation happened in the operations building at 0800, the 3 of them around a table with the imagery and Avery's printed analysis spread between them. Outside, the base was generating its normal morning noise, kick, vehicles, generators, the distant rhythmic sound of someone doing PT on the gravel track near the motor pool. Nolan listened to Ferris summarize the overnight analysis without looking at Avery. He looked at the imagery, at the circled position, at the number written in the margin. Then he looked at Avery. You're proposing we attempt to engage Kane at nearly 2 kilometers, he said. I'm proposing we confirm whether he's in that position, she said. The engagement question is separate. Walk me through the shot, he said. She did. She was precise and she was honest, which he had come to understand were not always the same thing in people, but in her appeared to be genuinely inseparable. She described the atmospheric conditions that would be required, the wind variables, the ballistic drop at that range for the platform and ammunition, the spotter requirements, the time needed to confirm 0 on a cold bore at that distance. She also described the 3 ways the shot could fail and what the consequences of each failure mode would be. When she finished, Nolan was quiet for a moment. Voss, he said. Ferris picked up the radio and summoned Voss from wherever he was. Voss arrived 4 minutes later, looked at the imagery, and listened to Avery repeat the summary with the specific economy she applied to repeating herself. Same information, no additional words. Voss didn't say anything for a moment. 1847, he said. Give or take 30 meters depending on which exact position within the observation area he occupies, she said. And you're proposing to take this shot. I'm proposing we confirm the target first. I know what you're proposing. I'm asking if you think you can make the shot. She looked at him directly. I think there's a reasonable probability I can make the shot under the right conditions. Reasonable probability, he said. What does that mean in numbers? 60%. Under optimal conditions, 70. The conditions here are not optimal. 60%, Voss repeated. I know what that sounds like, she said. It sounds like a coin flip with consequences. It's better than a coin flip, and the alternative is Kane continues operating in this valley with full knowledge of our patterns, because someone in our planning chain is feeding him information, and the next operation he sets up will be adjusted for what he learned last night. She paused. He saw us respond to his ambush. He knows how we move, how we communicate, how we cover our flanks. He'll use that. The room was quiet. Nolan looked at the circled position on the imagery again. 6 kilometers. A small circle of ground on a ridgeline that could be empty or could contain the man who had been systematically working through this valley for 6 months with enough patience and precision to make it look like background noise. We need current imagery, he said, before we make any decision. Drone pass would alert him, Ferris said. He'll have visual on anything we launch from here. Satellite window? Ferris checked his watch, then pulled up a schedule on his tablet. He looked at it for a moment. 14:22. We have a 14-minute pass. It was 08:13. 6 hours. Then we wait, Nolan said. At 14:30, we look at what we have. If he's in that position or shows evidence of recent occupation, we have a conversation about next steps. He looked at Avery. In the meantime, I want you to walk me through every piece of this analysis. Not the summary. Everything. She nodded. They spent the next 4 hours in the intelligence cell. At 14:22, the satellite pass ran its 14 minutes over the Red Mesa Valley, and the images began arriving at the Kestrel intelligence cell at 14:39, processed and segmented and delivered in the specific bureaucratic sequence that made Ferris visibly tense with the effort of not refreshing the feed manually. The northern ridgeline image came through at 14:47. They looked at it in silence for approximately 8 seconds. There was a vehicle in the circled position. It was partially concealed under an overhang of rock, which was why 3 previous passes had caught it and 3 others hadn't, depending on the sun angle. Heat signature analysis embedded in the imagery metadata indicated 2 personnel, both stationary. Below the vehicle, barely visible against the rock texture, was a tripod-mounted optic pointed southeast. Pointed, Nolan calculated, directly at FOB Kestrel. He's watching us right now, Voss said. Nobody disagreed. Nolan looked at Avery. Conditions? He said. She was already looking at the weather data on the second monitor. Wind is 11 from the southwest at my position. At range, I'm estimating 8 to 12 with variable direction between the ridge lines. There's a thermal column that forms over the valley floor in the afternoon that will affect the bullet path at the midpoint. Temperature is 94, density altitude approximately 6,200 feet. She paused. The thermal column is the problem. I won't be able to see it directly. I'll have to read the mirage off the valley floor and estimate the column's behavior. Estimate, Voss said. Everything at this range is an estimate, she said. I can make it an educated one. You need a spotter, Nolan said. Yes. I'll do it, Voss said. The room registered this. Not loudly, but Nolan felt it. 2 days ago, Voss had been the loudest voice questioning whether she belonged on the mission at all. Now he was volunteering to put himself in a forward position with her for a shot that he himself had called a coin flip with consequences. Avery looked at him. You've spotted at this range before, she said. Close to it. Different terrain. The valley creates specific mirage patterns in the afternoon. I'll need you to read the vapor layers off the midpoint of the shot and give me corrections in real time. It requires... I know what it requires, he said. I've been doing this for 14 years. A pause. Okay, she said. Nolan looked at the satellite image one more time. 2 personnel under a rock overhang, 6 kilometers from where he was standing, watching his base through a tripod optic. One of them was very possibly the man who had spent 6 months building a killing ground in this valley, and who last night had come closer than he wanted to admit to doing exactly what he'd designed it to do. How long to get into position, he said. An hour minimum, Avery said. We need to approach from the south and stay below the ridgeline until we're within 500 meters of the firing point. Any earlier and we're in his observation arc. The vehicle could move, yes. And if it moves before you're in position, then we've lost the opportunity and we come back. We don't adapt on the fly to a moving target at this range. Not this shot. He nodded. Go, he said. Take Reyes for security. If the vehicle moves or the shot doesn't present itself cleanly, you pull back. No improvising. Understood. She was already moving toward the door. Chan. The route they took was a lesson in patience that Reyes, who thought of himself as a patient man, found genuinely humbling. Avery moved through the terrain with a specificity of choice that he couldn't always follow in real time, but that, when he looked back at it, always turned out to have been correct. She avoided ground that would have given them faster movement, but left footprints in the soft sections. She chose the shaded side of every rock formation they passed. She stopped twice for no apparent reason, both times just before a section of ground that, he later realized, would have been visible from the northern ridgeline if anyone was looking in exactly that direction. She wasn't fast, but she was invisible. Voss moved behind her with his spotting scope and the professionalism of a man who had set aside whatever internal adjustment he was still working through in favor of the job, which was exactly what Nolan had expected of him. They reached the firing position at 1609. It was a natural depression in the terrain, shaded by 2 large boulders and facing northwest, with a clear corridor of air between the rock formations, that opened toward the northern ridgeline. The ground was firm. The position had a natural rest for the bipod. It was, Avery had noted on the imagery that morning, almost exactly the position she would have chosen if she were trying to observe the valley without being observed from the valley. She had circled it not because it was her firing point, but because Kane had probably used it himself. She assembled the rifle without speaking. Voss set up the spotting scope beside and slightly behind her, adjusting the tripod for height and range, settling into a position from which he could read the mirage patterns across the valley floor without silhouetting either of them. Reyes took a position 6 meters back facing their approach route and did what security elements do. He watched the ground they'd come from, and he stayed quiet. "How long to confirm 0?" Voss said. "I need a cold bore reading first. Give me a target." He found her a rock on the valley floor at a known distance, 800 meters, readable from the imagery. She fired once, suppressed, and the impact was 8 inches low and 2 right at that range. "Consistent with what I'd expect," she said. Cold bore pulled low. "I'll adjust." She made the adjustments in silence, working the turrets with the same touch memory certainty she'd shown at Kestrel's range. Then she settled into the position, adjusted her cheek weld, and went through the process of becoming still. It was 16:21. "Vehicle is still in position," Voss said, his eye to the spotting scope. "I can see the optic. 1 personnel at the vehicle. I can't confirm the second." "Where was the second when the satellite passed?" "North of the vehicle. Could be in the dead ground behind the overhang." She was quiet. "Mirage?" she said. "Slow boil at the valley midpoint. Vapors moving left to right at roughly 2 meters per second. The thermal column is..." He paused. "There. Approximately 900 meters from your position. It's not as pronounced as I expected." "It will intensify in about 20 minutes as the valley floor continues heating," she said. "I want to make this shot before that happens." "Then you need a confirmed target." "I know." The radio was on Reyes's kit, set to receive only. At 16:29 it clicked once, which was Nolan checking status. Avery clicked back twice. Still in position, no shot yet. The valley was extraordinary in the afternoon light. The red sandstone turning a deeper, almost arterial color as the sun moved, the shadows elongating into shapes that had no clear edges. A hawk was working a thermal somewhere to the south, circling without apparent effort, in the way that made it look like the air was doing the work. Voss watched the overhang. At 16:34, a figure moved. "Movement," Voss said, keeping his voice completely flat. "North side of the vehicle. Personnel moving to the optic. He's taking over from the first individual." A pause. "First individual moving to the vehicle." "Can you see a face?" she said. "Negative at this range. He's wearing a hat, looking southeast. The way he moved..." Voss paused again. A longer pause. He checked behind him before he touched the optic, looked at the approach from the north, then looked south. He paused. "That's not a nervous habit. That's a security check. He's trained." "Description," she said. "Medium build, deliberate movement, no wasted motion." Another pause. "He just adjusted the optic elevation without looking at the controls." Avery was quiet for 4 seconds. "That's him," she said. Voss looked at her, not through the scope, directly at her. "You can't confirm." "I know I can't confirm. That's my assessment." She settled deeper into the position. "Give me the mirage." He went back to the scope. "Vapor is moving left to right, slowing slightly. Column at 900 is... There's a pulse. Thermal pulse, moving south. Give it 10 seconds." She waited. The rifle was absolutely still. Her right hand was on the grip with exactly the pressure that was too little to influence the trigger, but enough to know where it was. Her cheek was welded to the stock. Her eye was behind the optic. She was breathing every 12 seconds, which was not something she controlled consciously anymore. "Column is settling," Voss said. "This is your window. Wind at your muzzle is consistent. Mirage is slow. Valley midpoint is as stable as it's going to get." She made a calculation. 4 adjustments in the scope, all from memory, all in the specific way that this barrel and this bullet and this atmospheric density combined at this range. She had run the ballistics the night before. She had run them again this morning. She had run them in her head during the approach. She was still not certain. "Call it," she said. "Send it," Voss said. She squeezed. The rifle moved into her shoulder with a force that was substantial at this caliber, a physical reminder that the world outside the scope was real and consequential. The suppressor dropped the report to a sharp compression, loud to them but inaudible at distance. The bullet was in the air for slightly longer than 2 seconds. 2 seconds is long enough to have several thoughts. She had two. The first was that the wind had shifted slightly left in the final moment, and she had already accounted for it, and she hoped she had accounted for it correctly. The second was that she might be wrong about who this person was. Then Voss said, "Hit." One word. She kept the scope on target. She was already working the bolt, a round chambered, back in position. If he was down but not out, she needed to know. If the second personnel emerged from the vehicle, she needed to know. "Personnel down," Voss said. "He's not moving." A pause. "Second personnel is, he's behind the vehicle. He's not exposing himself." Another pause. "He's moving north, on foot, leaving the vehicle." The second man was running. "Let him go," she said, which was not a decision within her authority, strictly speaking, but Voss didn't argue it, and she knew why. One running man in a valley they didn't control was a problem. One running man leaving an identified position they now owned was a different calculation. She clicked the radio 3 times. Signal, shot fired, target down. Nolan's voice came back immediately. "Confirm." Voss keyed the radio. "Confirm down. 1 personnel fleeing north on foot. Vehicle in place." A pause from the other end. "Copy," Nolan said. "Hold position. We're sending a ground element to confirm." The ground element took 47 minutes to reach the northern ridgeline, which was 47 minutes of holding in the firing position with the sun moving and the valley shadows lengthening and the rifle still up, because Reyes had reported possible movement on the western approach that turned out to be a goat that appeared equally alarmed by the encounter. Wainwright's voice on the radio at 1738. "On target. Confirming personnel down. He's..." A pause. "He's alive. Barely. Requesting immediate medevac." Nolan's voice. "Copy. Medevac is already spun up. What's his status?" "Hit in the upper chest, right side. He was wearing body armor, but the round penetrated." Another pause. "He's conscious. He's..." Another pause. "He says his name." Nolan. "What?" Wainwright. "He's saying his name over and over like he wants us to know who he is." A silence on the radio. Then Nolan. "Who is he?" Wainwright paused for what felt like a long time. "Kane," he said. "Victor Kane. He's saying tell them it was Kane. Tell them they shot Kane." Another pause. "Like he's proud of it." Avery was still in the firing position. Her eye was still behind the scope, but she wasn't looking at anything particular. Just the ridge line, the late afternoon light on the red rock, the long, empty space between where she was and where a man she had never met was lying in the dirt, saying his own name to soldiers who had spent the last 48 hours being afraid of it. Voss was looking at her. She didn't look back. "Start collapsing this position," she said. "We need to be off this ridgeline before dark." "Cross," Voss's voice. She started breaking down the rifle. "That was as..." he started, and then stopped. She waited. "I've been spotting since I was 22 years old," he said. "I have never seen a shot like that made under those conditions." She seated the barrel into the case. "The thermal column settled earlier than I expected," she said. "If it had held another 30 seconds, I would have had to wait and the window might have closed." "I know. I was watching the same thermal column." He folded his bipod. "That's not the point." She looked at him then. He was watching her with an expression that was not quite what she expected. Not admiration exactly. Something more complicated, something that had the quality of a man recalibrating something significant. "You called him," Voss said. "You looked at the way he moved and you said, 'That's him,' from 1,800 meters. I could have been wrong." "But you weren't." She closed the rifle case. "No," she said, "I wasn't." A pause. "I still could have been. It was pattern recognition on incomplete data." "Everything out here is pattern recognition on incomplete data," Voss said. She stood up and shouldered the case. "Then let's hope my patterns were better than his," she said. She walked past him toward Reyes and the approach route, and Voss stood there for a moment in the empty firing position with the valley going gold below him and something working its way through him that he wasn't going to resolve today. He picked up the spotting scope and followed her. The medevac helicopter passed over them on its way to the northern ridgeline as they were crossing the valley floor close enough that they could feel the rotor wash. Military markings. Moving fast. Reyes watched it pass. "He's going to survive," he said. "If the field surgery team is good," Avery said, "the round hit high enough that it likely missed the heart. The armor slowed it." She paused. "He's going to lose function in his right shoulder. The joint damage from a penetrating round at that angle." "I didn't ask for the medical detail," Reyes said. "Sorry." They walked in silence for a moment. "You wanted him dead," Reyes said. "It wasn't a judgment, just an observation." "I wanted him stopped," she said. "Dead would have accomplished that. So will a federal holding facility with a damaged shoulder." She paused. "The intelligence value of a live Kane is significant. He knows things about the network in this valley that 6 months of satellite imagery doesn't tell us." "That's very practical." "Yes." "Is that how you actually feel about it, or is that what you're supposed to say?" She walked 3 more paces before answering. "Both," she said. He nodded and didn't push it. They reached the base perimeter at 1812 and were cleared through the checkpoint by a guard who looked at the rifle case and then at Avery and then at the rifle case again without saying anything. Nolan was waiting at the operations building. He looked at her for a moment in the way he'd been looking at her since the first night, with something behind his eyes that she couldn't fully read, a calculation happening at a level he didn't necessarily advertise. "Kane is in surgery," he said. "Field hospital at Morrow Post. Prognosis is stable. He's going to make it." She nodded. "He was talking," Nolan said. "Before they sedated him, Wainwright recorded it." He paused. "He wasn't just saying his name. He was saying—" He stopped. "What was he saying?" Nolan looked at her for a moment. "He was saying, 'Who is she?' Over and over. 'Tell me who she is. I need to know who she is.'" He paused. Like it mattered to him more than the fact that he'd been shot. Avery was quiet. "He respects you," Nolan said. The way he said it, Wainwright said it didn't sound angry. It sounded like he was curious, she said. "Yeah." She looked at the operations building. "That's the most dangerous thing he's said so far," she said. Nolan looked at her. "Why?" "Because curious means he's still thinking about the problem," she said. "Angry men make mistakes. Curious men make plans." She went inside. The operations building smelled like the rest of the base, diesel and hot metal and the institutional cleaner they used on the floors. And it was cooler than outside by about 12 degrees, which the air conditioning labored to maintain and which Nolan always noticed more coming in from the heat than he did when he was in it. He stood outside for another moment. The valley was fully in shadow now, the last of the direct sun gone behind the western ridgeline, and the temperature was dropping with the specific immediacy of desert evenings that always felt slightly shocking after the accumulated weight of the day's heat. Somewhere in that shadow, whatever Kane had been building for 6 months was still there. The network, the pattern, the infrastructure of a campaign that had been designed by a man who was now sedated in a field hospital 2 hours away and who, even sedated, was asking the right question. Not who shot me. Who is she? Nolan looked at the door she'd gone through. He pulled out his phone and sent a message to a number he rarely used, a direct line to the Intelligence Directorate that had nominally assigned Avery Cross to this operation. The message was 4 words: "I need her file." He went inside. Behind him, the valley settled into its nighttime quiet, which was never entirely quiet because the desert had its own sounds. Rock cooling, small animals beginning their nocturnal work, the occasional breath of wind through the formations that sounded, if you were tired enough and had been out here long enough, almost like someone breathing in the dark just out of sight. Almost like someone waiting. The response came back in 11 minutes, which was fast enough that Nolan understood immediately the person on the other end had been waiting for exactly this message. It contained 2 lines. "File access requires in-person briefing. Senior officer en route. Arrival 0600 tomorrow. No name, no rank, no unit designation." He stared at the screen for a moment, then put the phone in his pocket and went to find Ferris. Ferris took the news with the specific stillness of a man who had learned over many years that the proper response to unexpected institutional complexity was to not react until he understood what he was reacting to. "No name," he said. "No name. Senior officer." "That's what it says." Ferris looked at his whiteboard. Kane's network was still mapped across it, the red lines and circled positions that Avery had reconstructed from 6 months of data, and beside it the additional layer that Ferris himself had added during the afternoon, the communications intercepts that had come in during the operation, partial and fragmentary but suggestive in ways that the intelligence analysts at Morrow Post were still working through. "The planning cell leak," Ferris said. "Still unresolved?" Nolan said. "If Kane had access to our alternate landing zone designation, he had access to someone inside the senior planning level." Ferris turned from the whiteboard. "The operation is done. Kane is in custody, but the source of that access is still in place." "I know." "Which means whoever is coming here tomorrow morning at 0600 to brief you on Specialist Cross's file is coming into a base that may have a compromised intelligence chain." Nolan looked at him. "You think I should tell them that before they arrive," he said. "I think someone should. I also think the fact that they didn't give you a name or a unit is its own kind of signal." "What kind?" Ferris picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, set it down again. "The kind that means they already know about the leak, and they've been watching it." The thought had occurred to Nolan too. He hadn't wanted to pull it all the way out and look at it directly, because it had implications he wasn't ready to work through yet. Specifically, the implication that Avery Cross had not been assigned to this operation because headquarters needed a sniper. She had been assigned because someone wanted eyes on a compromised planning chain from inside the operation itself, which would explain the restricted annex access, which would explain the evaluation program she'd mentioned and then declined to elaborate on, which would explain a classified file that required a senior officer to travel to a forward operating base in person rather than simply releasing the documentation through channels. He didn't say any of this to Ferris. Not yet. "I'll be at the gate at 0550, he said. "Keep this between us for now." "And Cross?" Nolan thought about that for a moment. "She already knows," he said. He wasn't certain of that. But he was close. And Sis. He found her in the chow hall at 1930, which was late for dinner and early for the overnight crowd, putting it in the brief window when the space was mostly empty. She was eating something that might have been rice with protein of unclear origin, and she was reading from a printed document that she turned face down when he sat across from her. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Habit," she said. "What is it?" "Intercept summary from the past 72 hours. Ferris gave me access." She paused. "There are 3 communications in the past 18 hours that reference Kane's network restructuring. Someone is already starting to move the pieces." "Kane has been in surgery for 4 hours. "Kane isn't the network," she said. "He's the operational commander. The network has people who are capable of continuing without him. They've been watching what happened today and they're adjusting." She picked up her fork and then put it down again. "There's a name that comes up in 2 of the 3 intercepts. Different call sign, different communication pattern than anything in the previous 6 months of data. It's new. New as in activated in response to today's events. Someone who wasn't visible before has just become visible." She paused. "I think Kane had a successor protocol. If he went down, someone else steps up, and that someone has been in position for a while." Nolan looked at her. She had been awake for approximately 36 hours, accounting for the 4-hour sleep on the cot. She looked it, not dramatically, but in the small ways that accumulate, a tightness around her eyes, a slight flatness to her posture that wasn't usually there. "Someone's coming here tomorrow morning," he said, 0600, "to brief me on your file." She was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she picked up her fork again. "I know," she said. "You know." "I was notified 2 hours ago." He held her gaze. "By whom?" he said. "My program officer." She ate a bite of whatever the rice situation was. "It's not what you're thinking." "What am I thinking?" "That I was placed here to surveil your planning chain. That the whole operation was secondary to some internal investigation." She looked at him directly. "That's not accurate." "Then what is accurate?" She set her fork down. She had the look of someone who was deciding how much a decision cost and whether they could afford it. The evaluation program is real, she said. The operational experience component is real. I was assigned to this operation because the operation needed a specific capability, and my program officer assessed that I had it. She paused. The fact that I was given restricted annex access was a standard program protocol for operational assignments. It wasn't specific to this operation. But you noticed the alternate landing zone, he said. Yes. And you noticed it because you'd read the restricted annex. Yes. Which someone without that access wouldn't have noticed. Probably not in the same way. Maybe not at all. She paused. I understand how it looks. How does it look? Like the access was the point, she said. Like I was placed here for the intelligence picture rather than the operational role. She met his eyes steadily. I was placed here for the operational role. The intelligence application was a consequence of my access, not the reason for it. I can't prove that to you. I can only tell you it's true. He looked at her for a moment. She was 19 years old, eating rice in a chow hall on a forward operating base after making a confirmed engagement at nearly 2 kilometers that had neutralized the most significant threat actor in this operational area in 6 months. And she was explaining herself to him with the precision and the patience of someone who had explained herself before, many times, and had learned that precision and patience were the only tools that reliably worked. The person coming tomorrow, he said. Do you know who it is? My program officer told me it would be the program director, she said, Colonel Harlan Marsh. The name landed with a specific gravity. Nolan knew it, not personally, but by reputation and by the particular way that certain names circulated in the community, with weight attached, with a suggestion of things that were real and consequential and not entirely visible at the surface level. Harlan Marsh had been running something for the past several years. Nobody outside a specific cleared population knew exactly what. The edges of it were visible in occasional things. A capability appearing in an operation that wasn't supposed to be there. A result achieved at a range or under conditions that the published program shouldn't have produced. An asset with a file that didn't match what they could do. He looked at her. How old were you when they recruited you? He said. She picked up her fork again. 16, she said. He didn't say anything for a moment. That's, he started. Legal, she said, with parental consent, which I had. She ate another bite. My mother signed the paperwork and then she cried for approximately 3 hours, and then she drove me to the assessment facility herself because she understood that there wasn't a version of my life where I didn't end up doing something like this, and she preferred the version where it was structured and supervised. What was the assessment? Long, she said. They were looking for a specific combination: pattern recognition, ballistic intuition, stress tolerance, and what the psychologist called functional emotional containment, which means the ability to feel things without being controlled by them in an operational context. She paused. I apparently scored unusually high on the ballistic intuition component. I don't know what that means exactly in a neurological sense. I just know that when I look at air, I see what the bullet will do in it. He sat with that. And the shots you've described as lucky, he said. She almost smiled. Not quite. I describe them as lucky when I make an adjustment based on something I perceived but can't fully explain. And then the adjustment is correct, she said. From the outside, it looks like luck. From the inside, it feels like reading something very fast that I haven't quite learned to read slowly. Like the thermal column this afternoon. I felt the pulse before Voss called it, she said. I didn't tell him because I wasn't certain, and I needed his confirmation. But I felt it. She paused. That's what I mean when I say luck, not randomness. Pattern recognition operating faster than I can consciously track. Nolan sat back. Outside, the base was settling into its nighttime operational rhythm. The generator hum, the distant radio traffic, the sound of a vehicle running somewhere near the motor pool. Normal sounds that he had stopped consciously registering months ago and that he now noticed briefly because the conversation he was in had the particular quality of making ordinary things feel briefly strange. Marsh, he said, what's he going to tell me? I don't know specifically, she said, but I think he's going to ask what you want to do next. What do you mean, what I want to do next? The network isn't resolved, she said. Kane is in custody, but the network is adjusting. The new call sign in the intercepts represents a continuation of the campaign that was already underway. And there's still an unidentified source inside the planning chain who has been providing operational intelligence to a hostile actor. Was there some saw on site? She paused. The situation here isn't finished. I think Marsh knows that. And I think he's coming here to ask whether you want to continue the operation with the current asset package or whether you want to request additional resources. Borsi I aspas strategist. And by current asset package, Nolan said, you mean you. Among others. He looked at her for a long moment. Get some sleep, he said. Real sleep. More than 4 hours. I know. Cross. She looked at him. You should have told me about the program earlier, he said. Not with anger, just as a statement. I know, she said. I was wrong not to. A pause. I've been trained not to disclose unless necessary. It took me longer than it should have to recalibrate what necessary meant with your team. It became necessary the moment you stepped off that helicopter. Yes, she said. I understand that now. He stood up. 0530, he said. My office. Before Marsh arrives. She nodded. He left her with the rice and the face-down intercept summary and the particular stillness that she carried through the world, and he walked back to his quarters through the desert night and tried to remember the last time something had surprised him this thoroughly. He couldn't. Colonel Harlan Marsh arrived in a vehicle with no unit markings at 0553, which was 7 minutes early, and stepped out with the specific unhurriedness of a man who was never late because he had arranged the world to accommodate his schedule, rather than the reverse. He was in his mid-50s, gray-haired, with a build that suggested he had been physically capable once and had maintained enough of it to be credible. He wore no rank insignia on his desert uniform, which in itself communicated something. He had a way of moving that Nolan recognized as cultivated, not the natural stillness of someone trained in field work, but the deliberate composure of someone who had decided, at some point, that composure was the most effective tool he had. He shook Nolan's hand at the gate and looked at him with the eyes of a man who had read a substantial amount of documentation about him in preparation for this meeting. Sergeant Drake, he said. Thank you for the message. I've been expecting it. You've been expecting it, Nolan said. Since the ambush. He smiled slightly. Not from pessimism. The operation was designed to produce exactly the kind of pressure that would make a person in your position want answers. Designed, Nolan said. Let's talk inside, Marsh said. Is Cross with you? She's in my office. Good. They walked. Quote. The office was a room barely large enough for 3 people and a desk, which meant that the meeting happened with everyone either sitting very close together or with Nolan behind the desk and Marsh and Avery in the chairs facing it, which was the configuration they ended up in, and which gave the whole thing the slightly uncomfortable quality of a meeting that couldn't decide whether it was a briefing or an interrogation. Marsh sat down, looked at Avery briefly, a specific look. The look of a man assessing something he had invested in and wanted to evaluate in person, and then looked at Nolan. What do you want to know first? He said. Who is she? Nolan said. She told you about the program. The outline. Then you know the fundamentals. Marsh crossed one leg over the other. She's been in training and controlled operational evaluation for 3 years. The full scope of her capabilities documentation is classified above what I can share with you at your current clearance level. What I can tell you is that she is among the top 3 assets developed through the program in 8 years of operation, and the only one currently active at her age. Top 3, Nolan said, in a specific capability combination, pattern recognition integrated with precision engagement. It's a rare combination at the level she demonstrates it. Most people have one or the other. Strong pattern recognition with average marksmanship. Exceptional marksmanship with standard threat assessment. She has both operating together at a level the program has not seen before. He paused. The shot yesterday. 1847 meters, Nolan said. Under afternoon thermal conditions with a wind variable she'd never fired through before, against a target she identified from behavioral pattern recognition alone, with a spotter she'd worked with for approximately 30 hours. Marsh paused. The program record for a confirmed first-round hit under operational conditions is 2,200 meters. She's 19. The individual who holds that record is 31. The room was quiet for a moment. Avery was looking at a point on the desk between herself and Nolan. She had the expression of someone listening to someone else describe them in a meeting, where the description was accurate, but the experience of hearing it was complicated. "The planning chain," Nolan said. Marsh's expression changed, slightly, an adjustment around the eyes. "Yes," he said, "the planning chain. You know about the leak. We've known for approximately 3 months that there was a penetration somewhere in the senior planning access tier for this operational area." He paused. "Identifying who it is has been difficult because the access tier has tight compartmentalization, and the information flow that's been compromised is broad enough to suggest someone with genuine senior access rather than peripheral access. And you sent her in." "I sent her in for the operational role. Her access to the planning documentation was standard protocol." He paused again. "But yes, in a situation where we had a planning chain with an identified penetration, having an additional set of eyes on the intelligence picture from inside the operation was not an unintended consequence." That's a careful way of saying it. It's an accurate way of saying it. Marsh looked at him steadily. "She was not sent here to conduct a counterintelligence operation. She was sent here to provide a precision capability that the operation required. If her presence and her access produced intelligence value beyond the operational role, that was a benefit, not the assignment." Nolan looked at Avery. She was still looking at the desk. "Cross," he said. She looked up. "Is that accurate?" he said. "Yes," she said. "But," Marsh said nothing, just waited. "The intercepts from last night," she said. "The new call sign. I've been trying to cross-reference it against the communications pattern of the personnel in the senior planning access tier." She paused. "I can't do that with the access I currently have. I need a broader pull on the historical communications data." "That's a significant ask," Marsh said. "I know. But if the source is still in place, whatever operation we run next will be compromised before it starts. Kane surviving in custody is a resource for whoever is feeding him information. He can communicate from the hospital. He can be debriefed by his own network through legal channels that are harder to monitor." She paused. "We need to identify the source before we run another operation, and I think I can do it, but I need the data." Marsh looked at her for a moment. The assessing look again, but different from before. Less inventory, more decision. "You've already started building the cross-reference," he said. "Yes." "With the data you currently have access to?" "Yes. I have a partial picture. There are 3 individuals in the access tier whose communication patterns show anomalies in the relevant period. I can't narrow it further without the broader pull." "3, Nolan said. "3, she confirmed. "But the anomalies are different. One of them has a pattern that looks like tradecraft, deliberate variation to obscure regularity. The other 2 might be coincidental. The tradecraft signature is the one I want to look at more carefully." "And if you can confirm it," Nolan said. "Then we have a name," she said, "and the next operation runs clean." The room held this for a moment. Marsh uncrossed his leg. He put both feet on the floor in the way that people do when they are about to say something they've decided to say. "Sergeant Drake," he said, "I want to ask you directly. After 2 operational days working with Specialist Cross, not on paper, in the field, what is your assessment?" Nolan looked at Avery. She didn't look back. She looked at Marsh. He thought about the airfield, the way she'd scanned the perimeter before she'd said a word, the diesel smell she'd caught in a night wind, the flanking call, the 900-meter shot she'd described afterward as marginal luck, with an honesty that had made him recalibrate everything he thought he understood about how good people talked about their own capabilities. He thought about the shot at 1847 meters, and the fact that she'd given herself 3 minutes to study a thermal column she'd never fired through before, and then told him she was at 72% confidence, which was, he now understood, her way of saying she was as close to certain as the conditions allowed. He thought about the fact that the shot had not been clean. It had hit the right target, but Kane was alive, and Avery Cross had processed that outcome with the same precise acknowledgement of operational reality that she applied to everything else. Not as a failure, as a result with consequences that needed to be managed. "She's the best I've worked with," he said. Marsh nodded once. "Then here's where we are," Marsh said. "Kane is in military custody at Morrow Post. He's stable, conscious as of this morning, and has declined to speak to anyone. His legal representation arrived at the hospital 2 hours ago, which was faster than it should have been, which tells us the network has resources positioned. He paused. The second personnel from the observation vehicle, the one who fled on foot, has not been located. He has 7 hours of head start in terrain we don't control. Another pause. And as of this morning's communication sweep, the new call sign cross identified in the intercepts has gone quiet, which can mean the operation is paused or can mean it's moved to a communication channel we're not reading. Which do you think it is? Nolan said. I think it paused, Marsh said, for the same reason anyone pauses when their primary operational commander goes down. Reorganization. The successor needs time to assess what's intact and what's compromised. He paused. But that window closes. And when it closes, whoever this new call sign belongs to will have made their decisions about how to proceed. How long is the window? Avery said. Days. Maybe a week. He looked at her. Possibly less. Then I need the data pull now, she said. Not when the operation is already moving. Marsh held her look. The data pull requires authorization from 2 people above my level, he said. I know. It will take time. How much time? 12 to 24 hours. She was quiet for a moment. Then we need to use the window we have, she said. The network is reorganizing. That means communication. Communication leaves trace. Whatever data I have access to right now, I need to work it while the traffic is highest. Marsh looked at Nolan. She's right, Nolan said. I know she's right, Marsh said. He stood up. He was tall, which the small room hadn't allowed Nolan to appreciate before. I'll make the calls. Cross, I need you available for a direct briefing at 1400 when I have authorization confirmation. Drake, he paused. You have a team that has been operational for the past 48 hours and has a personnel casualty situation that I want to address. Keller and Santos are fine, Nolan said. Minor wounds, both returned to duty this morning. I'm not talking about the wounds, Marsh said. Nolan looked at him. Morale, Marsh said, or more specifically, he paused with the care of someone choosing a precise word. Recalibration. Your team went into this operation with a specific set of assumptions about their asset, and those assumptions were comprehensively disproved. That's not a small thing. People don't always process that cleanly. Nolan thought about Voss standing in the empty firing position with the valley going gold below him, not moving, doing whatever it was he was doing in that long moment before he followed Avery down the ridge. I'll handle my team, he said. I know you will, Marsh said. He picked up the small bag he'd brought in with him. I'll be in the operations center until 1400. Meals would not go unappreciated. He left. Nolan and Avery sat in the office for a moment in the silence that follows a meeting that was dense with information and left behind it a specific kind of quiet. You knew he was coming before I sent the message, Nolan said. Yes. When were you going to tell me? When you asked, she said. You asked last night. He looked at her. She looked back. The 3 individuals in the access tier, he said. The one with the tradecraft signature. Yes. Do you have a name? She paused. Not confirmed, she said. I have a pattern match to a communication node associated with a name, but a pattern match is not identification. She paused. I don't want to put a name in front of you until I can do more than point to a pattern. Why? Because if I'm wrong and you act on it, the actual source has just been warned by watching us move against the wrong person. He nodded. At 1400, he said. Yes. He stood up. You did a good thing yesterday, he said. The shot, the analysis, all of it. I want you to know I said that not because Marsh was asking me to assess you, but because it's true. She looked at him for a moment with the specific expression of someone who didn't quite know what to do with a direct statement of that kind, and was processing it honestly rather than deflecting. Thank you, she said. Get some food. You haven't eaten enough since you landed here. The rice last night was not enough. He moved to the door. I'll have someone bring something to the intelligence cell. He was almost through the door when she said, Sergeant Drake? He turned. The person with the tradecraft signature, she said. It's not someone on your team. He held very still. I wasn't... He started. You were wondering, she said. That's reasonable. You should wonder about everyone in the access tier. She paused. It's not anyone on your team. Their communication patterns are clean. He looked at her for a long moment. How do you know I was wondering that? Because you're thorough, she said, and because if I were in your position, that's what I'd be wondering. He nodded. He went to find his team. Voss was in the armory, which was where Voss went when he had things to work through. He cleaned things that didn't need cleaning and arranged things that didn't need arranging, and sometimes, if what he was working through was large enough, he took apart a complete system and put it back together for no operational reason, just to have something in his hands that responded to correct action by functioning correctly. He was doing that now. Nolan sat on the bench across from him and watched. After a minute, Voss said, "She read the thermal column before I did." "I know. I've been doing this for 14 years. She's been doing it for..." He paused. "How long has she been doing it?" "A while," Nolan said. Voss turned a component over in his hands, put it down, picked up another one. "It's not..." He stopped, tried again. "I'm not angry. I want to be clear about that." "I know you're not. It's something else." He looked at the component in his hands. "I've been defining myself by this for 14 years. The capability. Being the person who does what I do at the level I do it." He paused. "And I watched her do it better yesterday. Not marginally, not close. Better." Nolan waited. "And the thing is," Voss said, "she knew she was better. She's known since she walked off that helicopter. And she didn't use it. She wasn't trying to make us feel bad about it. She was just doing the job." He set the component down. "That's the part that I keep coming back to. She was 19 years old and we treated her like she was incompetent, and she never..." He stopped again. "She never got even." "No," Nolan said, "she didn't. Most people would have." "Most people." Voss was quiet. "I told her she didn't know what normal smelled like out here," he said. "I remember. She'd already smelled something that saved our lives." "I know." Voss picked up the component again and then put it back down with a finality that meant he was done with the armory for today. "She needs a spotter," he said. "Going forward, whatever this operation is." "That's what you want?" "That's what makes sense," Voss said. "I can read the conditions she needs called. I know how she communicates." He paused. "And I owe her." Nolan looked at him. "She's not keeping score," he said. "I know," Voss said. "That's exactly why I am." Outside the armory, the desert morning was approaching its full heat, the sky going from its brief, forgiving blue to the white-hot clarity that would last until evening. Somewhere in the operational planning cycle, 1,400 hours was coming with whatever Marsh's authorization calls would produce, and after that, the picture would either sharpen or it wouldn't. Nolan walked toward the intelligence cell. Through the window, visible from 15 meters away, Avery Cross was already at the workstation. 3 screens. The printed imagery from the night before, a new set of intercept summaries that had come in overnight. She hadn't eaten yet. He was fairly certain of that. She was looking at something on the center screen with the focused attention she brought to everything, and she had a pen in her hand, and she was writing a name on the notepad beside the workstation. She stopped. She looked at what she'd written. Then she circled it. Nolan watched through the window for a moment without going in. A name circled on a notepad. He knew she'd said pattern match wasn't confirmation, but the way she looked at that circled name, with no satisfaction in it and no doubt, told him something that the data alone wasn't supposed to tell him yet. She already knew. He went inside. She didn't look up when the door opened, which meant she'd heard him coming and had already decided not to perform the act of appearing less focused than she was. He had come to understand this about her in 3 days. She didn't perform anything. It was one of the more disorienting things about working with her, because most people performed constantly, and the absence of it required a different kind of reading. He looked at the notepad. She had turned it face down. "You have a name," he said. "I have a pattern match that is strong enough that I'm treating it as a name," she said. "There's a difference." "What's the difference right now, practically speaking?" She looked at him. Then she looked at the face-down notepad. "The difference is that a pattern match requires confirmation before action," she said. "And the confirmation requires the data pull that Marsh is currently trying to authorize. If I give you the name before the confirmation, and you do anything at all, even look at this person differently in a meeting, the source will know the investigation has moved. You think this person is that sensitive to surveillance? The tradecraft signature I identified exists because this person has been operating carefully for a long time, she said. Yes, I think they're that sensitive. He pulled up a chair and sat across from her. Then we wait for Marsh, he said. Yes. He looked at the face-down notepad. She put her hand on it. Not dramatically, just placed her palm flat on the back of it. Not yet, she said. Okay, he said. They sat like that for a moment. Him on one side of the workstation, her on the other, the notepad between them with her hand on it, the screens behind her cycling through data streams that represented months of activity in a valley that had been slowly turning into something very dangerous for people who hadn't realized it was happening. You haven't eaten, he said. I know. Cross. I know, Sergeant Drake. I'll eat after 1400. He stood up. I'll bring something. You can eat while you work. She looked like she was going to argue and then didn't. Thank you, she said. Marsh's authorization came through at 11:37, which was 2 hours and 23 minutes earlier than the low end of his estimate. And when he walked into the intelligence cell with his phone still in his hand and told Avery she had full historical communications access for the relevant personnel tier, she was already typing before he'd finished the sentence. He looked at Nolan. She's been waiting, Nolan said. She's been ready, Marsh corrected. They watched her work for a few minutes. It was not exciting to watch in the conventional sense. She was reading data, cross-referencing, running comparison queries against the historical baseline she'd already constructed. But there was something in the quality of her attention that made it difficult to look away. The way she moved through information had the same character as the way she moved through terrain, economical, purposeful, never touching something twice. At 12:04, she stopped. She looked at the screen for 10 seconds. Then she picked up the notepad, turned it over, and placed it on the desk between herself and Marsh without saying anything. Marsh looked at the name. His expression did not change in any large way. But something shifted in it, a small tightening, a brief compression of something that had been, until this moment, held in suspension. You're certain, he said. The confirmation data matches the pattern match, she said. The communication node I identified in the pattern analysis is directly linked to this individual's secure account. There are 7 contacts in the relevant period, all using a rotation protocol that's standard for trained tradecraft, all corresponding within a 48-hour window to operational decisions that were subsequently compromised. She paused. I'm certain. Marsh set the notepad down. Nolan looked at the name. He knew the name. Not well. But well enough. A face attached to it, a position, a series of meetings over the past several months where he had been in the same room and had no reason to look at this person as anything other than what they appeared to be. The feeling that moved through him was not anger exactly. It was something quieter and heavier. The specific weight of understanding that a thing you thought was one shape was actually a different shape, and all the time you spent looking at the wrong shape was time something real was happening underneath it. How long? He said. Based on the communication pattern, the relationship began approximately 14 months ago, Avery said. The early contacts are low frequency and test-oriented. The pattern intensifies at month 7, which corresponds to Kane's network becoming more active in this valley. She paused. The source wasn't recruited by Kane directly. The initial contact node is different from Kane's network signature. I think Kane inherited the source from a broader network about 7 months ago. Which means the source has been active for longer than Kane's operation, Marsh said. Yes, and may have information about other operational areas that we haven't assessed yet. Marsh was quiet for a moment. He picked up his phone. I need to step out, he said. 15 minutes. He left. The room was very quiet. Nolan sat down. Avery was looking at the screens but not reading them. The focused attention had shifted to something more internal. The specific quality of a person who has just completed a major task and is now sitting in the sudden space where the task used to be. How long did you know? He said. I had the name at 0200 this morning, she said. Before I slept. That's why I circled it. She paused. I needed the confirmation data to be certain. Without it, I just had an educated conclusion. And you slept with that. I slept with it, she said, or tried to. 3 hours. A pause. It's hard to sleep when you're looking at a name that means someone in a planning cell has been helping a hostile network anticipate operations that your team was running. She looked at the desk. People could have died. People almost did. He didn't tell her that was not her fault. She already knew that, and telling her would have been the kind of reflexive comfort that she didn't need and would have seen through anyway. You kept it off the record until you were certain, he said. That was the right call. I know, she said. It still wasn't easy. It shouldn't be easy, he said. The day something like that gets easy is when you should worry. She looked at him. Is that from experience? She said. Yes, he said. She nodded. Then she looked back at the screens. The network in the valley, she said. The new call sign. After the source is removed from the planning chain, we have a window to run a clean operation against whatever's left of Kane's structure. The successor is reorganizing, but they haven't had time to build the kind of intelligence picture that Kane had. They're operating without the planning data feed. You're already thinking about the next operation, he said. I'm always thinking about the next operation, she said. And then quietly, it's easier than thinking about some other things. He didn't ask what the other things were. Marsh came back in 18 minutes, not 15, and when he returned, his phone was in his pocket, and his expression had the particular settled quality of a man who had made irreversible phone calls and was now operating in the reality those calls had created. An arrest team is being coordinated at Morrow Post, he said. Civilian legal jurisdiction. This goes to federal prosecution, not military tribunal, because of the nature of the information passed. He looked at Nolan. The individual will be taken into custody within the next 4 hours. You won't be notified through normal channels because the operational security around the arrest needs to stay tight until it's complete. I understand, Nolan said. I'm telling you now because your team has a right to know that the situation that put them in danger has been addressed. He paused. Not through normal channels, but addressed. And Kane? Nolan said. Kane will be transferred to a federal holding facility within 48 hours. The shoulder damage is significant. He'll have limited function in that arm for the rest of his life. He won't be running field operations again regardless of legal outcome. Marsh paused. He's been talking. Both Nolan and Avery looked at him. He started talking this morning, Marsh said. Not to us, to his legal representation. But the legal representative in question has a relationship with our organization that Kane apparently wasn't aware of. He looked at Avery. He's been asking about you. She was quiet. What has he been asking? She said. How old you are. What program you're from. Whether you've been in combat before this operation. Marsh paused. He wanted to know who taught you to read the thermal patterns the way you do. Nobody, she said. That's what I expected you to say. It's the truth. The program gave me the physics and the framework. The reading is something it's mine. I don't know where it came from. I've always done it. Marsh nodded slowly. He said something interesting, Marsh continued. Through the representative. He said, and I'm going to be precise about this. He said, that girl is better than I was at her age. Tell her I said that. Marsh paused. He's 47. He was running field operations at 19. The room held this. Avery's expression didn't change in any visible way, but something happened in the area around her eyes. A slight shift, a brief thing, that might have been anything, and that Nolan had learned was how she processed things that hit her harder than expected. Tell him I said thank you, she said finally. I'll tell him. And tell him the thermal column moved earlier than I expected. I got lucky. Marsh looked at her for a moment. I'll tell him that too, he said. The arrest happened at 15:31, 4 hours and 11 minutes after Marsh made his calls, in an office at Morrow Post that Nolan would never be told the specific location of. He learned it had been completed through a single message from Marsh, who was at the operations center when his phone lit up, and who read the message and then put the phone down on the table and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, It's done. Nolan was with the team when he passed this on, assembled in the briefing room not because he'd called a formal briefing, but because they had gathered in the way that teams gather when they understand something is happening and want to be present for whatever comes of it. He told them the broad shape of it, not the name, that would come through appropriate channels in its own time, but the fact of it. The source that had compromised their insertion route, their alternate landing zone, the operational intelligence that had put them in a firefight 2 nights ago. Found. In custody. Federal charges pending. The room took it in. Santos, jaw still bandaged, looked at the table for a moment. So the ambush, he said, was resourced with information from inside the planning chain, Nolan said. Yes. And Kane? In federal custody. Stable. Not going anywhere. Keller, who had the arm graze cleaned and dressed and had refused to be evacuated with a stubbornness that Nolan had formally objected to and privately respected, looked at the door. Where's Cross? He said. Intelligence cell, Nolan said. Keller nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else and was processing whether to say it. Reyes saved him the effort. She should be here, sir, Reyes said. She's working, Nolan said. She's always working. Reyes looked at him. We should tell her it's done, in person, not through you, with respect. Nolan looked at his team, 8 faces. The same faces that had stood on the tarmac 2 days ago, watching a 19-year-old specialist step off a helicopter with a rifle case almost as tall as she was, wearing the collective expression of men who had already decided what they were looking at before she said a word. Let's go, he said. She looked up when 8 people walked into the intelligence cell, which was not built for 8 people, and immediately felt like a space that had been converted into something it wasn't designed for, people standing along the walls and around the workstations, and in the doorway because there was no other option. She looked at Nolan. It's done, he said. She held his eyes for a moment. The source is in custody, he said. Federal jurisdiction. She exhaled. It was a small sound, barely audible, but in a quiet room it was enough. She looked at the screens, then she looked at the team filling the small space around her. Reyes stepped forward. He didn't make a speech. He extended his hand. She shook it. That seemed to be enough for everyone to understand what the gesture meant, because after that they moved through the small space one at a time. Not in a line, not formally, just the way people move toward something when they've decided to stop moving away from it. Keller shook her hand and said, "Good work," which was Keller's version of a paragraph. Wainwright said, "I owe you a beer when we're somewhere that has beer." Santos, with the bandaged jaw, tried to say something and found the jaw movement uncomfortable and settled for a nod that communicated more than most full sentences would have. Chew and Okafor together, which was how they did most things. Babcock, who had been the quietest of the team through the entire operation, and who Avery had interacted with less than anyone, stopped in front of her and said, "I'm from West Texas. I grew up shooting prairie dogs at 500 yards. He paused. "What you did yesterday. I want you to know I understand what that means technically, and it was something I've never seen." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. Last was Voss. He stood in front of her for a moment, and she waited without trying to fill the silence, which was something she was good at and which Voss needed because he was still working through how to say what he was trying to say. "I told you that you didn't know what normal smelled like out here," he said. "I remember. And you caught the diesel anyway." "Yes. And then you caught the flank timing, and the vehicle repositioning, and the 900-meter shot in conditions you'd never fired in, and then you read a thermal column that—" He stopped. "I've been a designated marksman for 14 years, he said. "I've been proud of that. I have a right to be proud of it." He paused. "You have more right than me." "That's not how it works," she said. "I know it's not," he said. "I'm not being precise. What I mean is—" He stopped again. He was a man who communicated better through action than through language, and he knew it, and right now he was doing the harder thing of using language anyway. "I should have given you the same respect on the tarmac that I give any other operator I don't know yet. The same baseline respect. Not earned, just baseline. I didn't." She looked at him. "I know why you didn't," she said. "I looked like I didn't belong there." "That wasn't a reason," he said. "No," she said. "It wasn't." She paused. "But I understand it." He nodded. "For what it's worth," he said, "you're the best Overwatch I've ever called for. And I want you to know that's not me trying to balance a ledger. It's accurate." She held his gaze for a moment. "Will you spot for me again?" she said. He looked slightly surprised, which she had calculated would happen, and which was why she'd asked it that way. "Yes," he said. "Then we're square," she said. He almost smiled. Got close. Marsh found Nolan outside afterwards, standing in the space between the intelligence cell and the operations building where the afternoon shade was just beginning to fall. She'll need a transition briefing, Marsh said, when this operation closes. Formal documentation, program assessment, the next assignment determination. He paused. I'd like your written assessment for her file. It carries weight. You'll have it, Nolan said. Marsh was quiet for a moment. He looked at the intelligence cell. She's been in 3 controlled operational evaluations before this, he said. Shorter duration, lower threat level, more supervision. This was the first assignment where she was functionally independent, where the operation wasn't designed around her. He paused. She exceeded every projection we had for this stage of her development. What does that mean for her next assignment? Nolan said. It means the program advances significantly faster than the original timeline. Marsh paused. Which is good for the program. I want to be honest with you. It's not necessarily good for her. Development that moves faster than the person is ready for creates specific kinds of problems. Nolan looked at the intelligence cell. Through the window visible from where he stood, Avery was back at the workstation. The team had cleared out and she had returned to the data. Not the source investigation, which was done, but the Valley network, the new call sign, the operational picture that extended past what had already been resolved. She hasn't stopped working, Nolan said. I noticed. She said something to me, Nolan said, when I asked if she was always thinking about the next operation. She said it was easier than thinking about some other things. Marsh was quiet. What other things? Nolan said. That, Marsh said, is the question the program psychologist and I have been discussing for the past 3 years. He paused. She experienced things in the evaluation period that I am not at liberty to discuss, but that were formative in ways that weren't entirely healthy. The capability development was exceptional. The rest of it requires more time and more space than the program has provided so far. He looked at Nolan. She doesn't stop, because stopping means dealing with what's accumulated. Nolan looked at this window. She was reading a data stream, one screen, the focus absolute. What do you need from me? He said. Nothing operational. The write-up, as I said, and Marsh paused. She trusts you. That's not common for her. She trusts Voss now, which is remarkable given where they started. She trusts Reyes. He paused. If you encounter her in future operational contexts, and given her trajectory, you likely will. Treat her like she's still figuring out what she is. Because she is. She's 19, Nolan said. Yes, Marsh said. She is. He left at 1700, the unmarked vehicle pulling out of the gate with the same absence of ceremony as his arrival. Nolan went back inside at 1720 and found her still at the workstation, but the screens were dark. She was sitting in the chair with the notepad in her hands, not the one with the circled name, which had been transferred to Marsh's custody, but a new one, blank, just the cover. She was looking at nothing. He pulled up a chair. She didn't perform awareness of him. She just acknowledged it and let the silence continue for a moment. Marsh tell you anything? She said. A few things. About me? Some. She looked at the dark screens. I don't always know what to do when it's over, she said. The operation, the task. She stopped. There's a period after where everything slows down and I'm not sure what to do with the speed. That's normal, he said. I know it's normal. Knowing it doesn't make it easier. He nodded. You should call your mother, he said. She looked at him. Marsh mentioned her, he said, just that she drove you to the assessment facility, that she understood you. Something moved across Avery's face. Not large, not performative, just a thing that moved. I haven't called her since I deployed, she said. I know, call her. She looked at the blank notepad cover. She's going to ask if I'm okay, she said. Are you? A pause. I made a shot at almost 2 kilometers and I don't know exactly how I knew the wind was right, she said. I identified a source inside a planning chain from communication pattern analysis, and I had to sit on the name for 8 hours because I wasn't certain yet, and someone could have run an operation during those 8 hours, and people could have died because of what I knew and didn't say yet. She paused. She stopped. I'm functional. I don't know if that's the same as okay. It's not, he said. But it's enough for right now. She was quiet. Call her, he said. Not for the program, not for the debrief. Just call her. She set the notepad down. Okay, she said. He stood up. The Valley Network, she said. The new call sign. Not tonight, he said. Marsh authorized. Not tonight, Cross. The authorization will still be valid tomorrow. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone calculating whether to argue. She decided not to. Okay, she said again. He went to the door. Sergeant Drake, she said. He turned. She was still in the chair, the blank notepad in her hands, looking at him with the particular directness she brought to everything. When I got off the helicopter, she said, the way everyone looked at me. He waited. I've been looked at that way before, she said, in every evaluation context, every operational setting, every room where someone read my file and then looked at me and couldn't reconcile the two. She paused. I've learned to work around it. I've learned to let the performance speak and ignore the looks. But, he said, but it still costs something, she said. Every time. It's a smaller cost now than it used to be, but it's not zero. He looked at her. I know, he said. I just wanted you to know that it was real, she said. The looks, the thing they meant. They cost something even when I don't show it. I know, he said again. I'm sorry we put that cost on you. She nodded. Once. Thank you for saying that, she said. She called her mother at 1800, sitting on the cot in the empty billeting tent, with the door open to the early evening air, which had lost enough of its heat to be almost comfortable, the sky going through its brief, extravagant transition from white-hot to the deep orange and rust that the desert did in the last half hour before dark. Her mother picked up on the second ring. Avery? Just the name. The way she said it, not a question, not alarmed, just the name, landing in the air with the specific weight of a person who had been waiting without performing the act of waiting. Hi, Mom. A pause. Are you okay? She looked at the open door, the sky outside, the way the colors were moving across the dust and the low structures of the base. I'm functional, she said. A longer pause. Avery, I know. She pressed her free hand against her knee. I'm okay. I think. It was a hard few days. Did you do what you went there to do? Yes. Did everyone come home? Our side, she said. Yes. 2 minor injuries. Everyone came home. She heard her mother exhale, a long, slow sound. Then you did your job, her mother said. I did my job. And I'm sitting in a tent in the desert watching the sun go down, Avery said. It's very orange. I didn't expect it to be this orange. A pause. Then her mother laughed. It was a short sound, surprised, the kind of laugh that happens before you can decide whether to allow it. It's always orange in the desert, her mother said. I know, I just didn't expect to notice it. She paused. I've been noticing things differently out here. Like what? Like how air moves, she said. I always noticed it, but I notice it more now. I think because it matters more here. She paused. A lot of things matter more here. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Come home when you can, she said. Not when you're done, just when you can. I know. Avery. Mom. I'm proud of you, her mother said. I want you to hear that. She looked at the orange sky. I know, she said. I know you are. They talked for another 20 minutes. Small things. Domestic things. The kind of conversation that had nothing to do with valleys or networks or shots at distances that exceeded standard parameters, and which was, for exactly that reason, the most important conversation she'd had in 3 days. When she hung up, the sky had gone from orange to the deep, bruised purple that preceded full dark, and the first stars were visible above the eastern ridgeline. She sat with it for a moment. Then she went to find food. Real food. Enough of it, at a time that was not driven by operational necessity. She sat in the chow hall with Reyes, who had come in for the same reason at the same time, and they ate without talking much, which was its own kind of comfort. The formal operational closeout happened 3 days later, after the arrest had cleared federal processing, and the associated documentation had been sealed, and the intelligence products from Avery's analysis had been transferred to the relevant agencies for action. Marsh conducted the debrief via secure video from wherever he had gone after leaving Kestrel, and it was thorough and methodical and produced a record that Nolan understood would matter in ways that wouldn't be visible to him. He wrote his assessment for her file that same evening. He wrote it 3 times. The first version was too formal, accurate, but with the particular bloodlessness of official documentation that stripped the thing of what was true about it. The second version overcorrected and read more like a recommendation letter than an operational assessment. The third version was what he sent, specific, honest, grounded in what he had seen her do, and equally honest about what it had cost her to do it in the environment they'd put her in. He wrote, Specialist Cross demonstrated operational capability that exceeded the parameters of her assignment and the expectations of personnel with significantly greater experience. She was effective. She was honest about her limitations in a manner that is unusual and valuable. She was placed in an environment where every structural dynamic worked against her being taken seriously, and she did not respond to that with resentment or performance. She responded with work. That is not a small thing. Most people cannot do it. I have not encountered anyone her age who could. He paused. Then he wrote, She is still figuring out what she is. She should be given the space to do that without the program consuming the time it requires. She is not a resource. She is a person who has an exceptional capability, and the distinction matters. He sent it. She left Kestrel on a Wednesday, in the early morning, on the same kind of transport helicopter that had brought her in. The rifle case went into the cargo net. Her kit bag went in beside it. The team was on the tarmac. Not because anyone ordered them there, just because they were. She went down the line the way she'd come up it 4 days ago, except differently. Not the extended hand of formal reporting, but the specific gravity of departure, which has its own weight that arrival doesn't. Reyes said, Next time you're assigned somewhere, hope it's somewhere with actual food. I'll put in a request, she said. Babcock said nothing but shook her hand with both of his, which was the most expressive thing anyone had seen him do. Wainwright said he wasn't joking about the beer. Santos's jaw had been cleared for more movement, and he managed, You shoot better than everyone I've ever met. Don't let anyone tell you different. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. Voss was at the end. She stopped in front of him. Learn the valley's thermal patterns, she said. If there's another operation here, whoever they send for Overwatch is going to need to know them. I'll document what I observed, he said. The afternoon column at 900 meters. Moves earlier than the morning data predicts. I have it. She nodded. You're a good spotter, she said. I want you to know that. You called the conditions correctly, and you didn't second-guess the timing even when I took the full 3 minutes. You needed the 3 minutes, he said. Yes, but most spotters would have gotten nervous at 2 minutes 30. He looked at her. I got nervous at 2 minutes 45, he said. She almost smiled. Good, she said. That's the right time to get nervous. She turned to Nolan. He had been watching the whole thing from a slight distance, which felt right, close enough to be present, far enough for the exchanges to be theirs. He stepped forward. She looked at him for a moment. The Valley Network, she said. The new call sign. The data I handed off to Marsh's team. I know, he said. They'll work it. Someone needs to run the operation before the successor consolidates. The window is Cross. She stopped. Go, he said. Whatever's next, do that. She held his eyes. The assessment you wrote, she said. Marsh told me you'd written one. He wasn't supposed to tell you that. He told me you'd written it and that it was honest, not what it said. She paused. Thank you for writing something honest. The records in my file are usually either too careful or too effusive. Either way, they don't. She stopped. I appreciate honest. I know, he said. He extended his hand. She shook it. And then she did something she hadn't done in the tarmac line 4 days ago when she arrived. She met his eyes and didn't look away. And what passed between them in that moment was the specific acknowledgement of two people who had been through something real together and who would carry it differently, but carry it nonetheless. Be careful, he said. I know, she said. You too. She walked to the helicopter. She loaded her rifle case. She sat inside and buckled in, and the door closed, and the rotors began cycling up, and the whole machine lifted off the ground in a wash of rotor blast and red dust, and the team stood on the tarmac and watched it go until it banked east over the ridgeline and disappeared. The desert went quiet in the way it does after a helicopter departs. The absence of noise landing almost physically, the base sounds reasserting themselves one at a time. Voss said, "She left the thermal documentation notes in the intelligence cell, written out by hand." Nolan looked at him. "She knew she wasn't going to be here for the next operation," Voss said. "She wrote it down so whoever runs Overwatch next has what she figured out." He paused. "She spent part of last night doing that." Nolan looked at the empty sky where the helicopter had been. Part of the night. After she'd called her mother. After she'd eaten. She'd spent part of the night writing down what she'd learned about the way air moved in a valley she'd been in for 3 days, so that the next person who came in to do her job would start with more than she had. He stood on the tarmac for another moment. Then he turned to his team. "Briefing at 0900, he said. "The Valley network isn't resolved and we have a window. Let's not waste it." They moved. 6 weeks later, the successor network in the Red Mesa Valley was dismantled in an operation that ran clean. No compromised routes, no pre-positioned ambush elements, no blocking forces at the alternate landing zones. The operation took 14 hours and produced 11 arrests and a documentation cache that the intelligence community spent the following 4 months processing. Victor Kane entered federal prosecution facing charges that carried mandatory minimums in the range of 3 consecutive lifetimes, which his legal team immediately began contesting on procedural grounds that everyone involved assessed as having a low probability of success. His right shoulder required 2 additional surgeries. He would regain approximately 40% of its original function. The individual arrested for intelligence compromise and material support to a hostile network pleaded not guilty, then not guilty again in a sequence that his legal team managed with the specific creativity of people billing by the hour with no end in sight. The federal case was expected to take years. The outcome was not expected to be in his favor. Harlan Marsh submitted a program report that was classified at a level requiring a specific clearance to read, and which recommended, among other things, an accelerated development pathway for one specific asset and a parallel expansion of the support and recovery resources available to that asset, because capability without sustainability was a resource management failure, and not just a human one. The program psychologist noted in her own addendum that the asset in question had made significant progress in what she called post-operational integration during the current deployment, attributing this in part to the quality of the relationships formed within the operational unit, and in part to a phone call with a family member that the asset had described in a follow-up session as the most normal 20 minutes I've had in 3 years. Nolan Drake received a commendation for the operation, which he read once and put in a drawer. He continued running operations out of FOB Kestrel for another 4 months, rotating home in the early spring to a house that smelled like dust and disuse and the particular quiet of a space that had been waiting without expectation. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked at the window. He thought about a 19-year-old specialist standing in the wind on a desert tarmac, scanning a perimeter before she'd said a word to anyone. The specific quality of attention she brought to everything she looked at. The way she described luck as pattern recognition moving faster than conscious thought. The way she'd put her hand flat on the notepad. Not yet. He thought about what Marsh had said. She's still figuring out what she is. He thought about everyone who would look at her and see the wrong thing first, and the cost she'd said that carried, and the fact that she kept going anyway. Not because the cost disappeared, but because she'd calculated that the work was worth it. He thought about the hole that kind of steadiness carves in a person. The price of it. The discipline of building something real in a world that keeps handing you reasons not to. He drank his coffee. Outside, the morning was doing what mornings do. Indifferent, unhurried, full of the ordinary light that falls on everyone equally regardless of what they've done or who they've been or what they carry. It fell on a girl somewhere who was already working, already watching the way the air moved, already seeing what was coming before it arrived. The world will always find a reason to look at you and see something smaller than what you are. The only answer that matters is the work, not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right.